Yep. Are we ready to go? Lots of buttons. Okay, everyone. Bore da. My name is Councillor Cheryl Carlisle and I'm the Chair of the Finance and Resources Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Can I welcome everyone to the meeting, which is a multi-location meeting. The meeting will be live streamed and recorded and will be available for viewing after the meeting. Should the live streaming fail, the meeting will continue and a recording will be available through the Council's website following the conclusion of the meeting. Can I remind members that translation facilities are available and for those attending remotely to choose your language of choice, please. For those wishing to speak in the chamber, please raise your hand. For those attending remotely, please use the raise hand function. We will alternate between speakers in the chamber and remote attendees. For those attending remotely, please note that those in the chamber will be unable to use the chat facility. Committee members who are attending remotely are required to leave their camera on throughout the debate and when voting in order to maintain the integrity of the decision-making process. If you do need to leave the meeting temporarily, pop a message in the chat function so the Democratic Services Officer is aware and then let us know when you return. Can I stress that I expect everyone present and participating in this meeting to conduct themselves appropriately and be respectful to each other. That applies to members, officers and anyone in the public gallery. When I open up the debate to members, I will ask committee members to speak and put their questions first, followed by non-committee members. It would be helpful if members could ask all their questions in one go. Whilst I do not wish to stifle debate, can I remind members that any questions should be focused on the subject matter and to avoid repetition. If I feel the length of individual speeches are negatively impacting on the overall time for discussion and becoming unmanageable, I will defer to the committee's rules of procedure, which limit the length of speeches to 5 minutes. And today, can I remind members there's an exempt item on the agenda, so those online, could you be the only person in the room to hear any confidential and exempt items being discussed? Deal. We now move on to item 1, apologies for absence, please, Jane.
I have apologies from Councillors Stephen Price, Harry Saville and Jenny Williams, Strategic Director, Matt Giorgio, Head of Law and Governance.
Lovely, thank you very much. Any other apologies from members? No? Okay, we now move on to item 2, declarations of interest. Any declarations? Anybody online? No? Okay. Item 3, urgent matters. I'm not aware of any urgent matters at all. So move on to item 4, the minutes. To approve and sign to correct record the minutes of the previous meetings beginning the 10th of July 2024, pages 4 to 11. Could I ask for a proposer and seconder, please? Councillor Gareth, Councillor Nia, if everyone would like to show in favour of those minutes. Anyone against? Any abstentions? Those carried, thank you. We now move on to the minutes of the meeting of the 25th of July, pages 12 to 15. Again, proposer and seconder, please, members. Councillor Gareth, Councillor Sharon. And if you'd all like to show. And anyone against? No. Any abstentions? No. Those minutes are carried. Thank you, members. Item 5, questions to Cabinet members. There aren't any today. So we go on to item 6, to review the forward work programme, pages 16 to 60. And Dawn Hughes, our Scrutiny and Committee Services Officer, is going to deal with this issue. Thank you, Dawn.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, members. So can I advise you of some changes to the forward plan since we've last met? So due to a number of items coming forward for the next meeting, the Chair has reviewed the forward plan as follows. So there's an update, there's a resilience plan which will come forward to the meeting on the 2nd of September. Therefore, the workforce dashboard and the update on the waste transfer station has been moved to the 7th of October to accommodate this. as there's no decisions required for them. And then we've also moved the annual reports for the Strategic Equality Plan and the Employment Monitoring to the 21st of October. That's my update, Chair.
Lovely, thank you. Thank you very much, Dawn. Any comments, questions, members? Nope. Okay. Could I have a proposal and a seconder for the forward work programme then, please? Councillor Nia, Councillor Hannah. Thank you. If everyone would like to show. Lovely. And anyone against? No. Okay, that's carried. Thank you. We now move on to item 7A, the capital programme 23-24, the outturn position, pages 61 to 81. I think Councillor Charlie's going to say a few words, and then Amanda Hughes, our Director of Finance and Resources, is going to present the report in detail. Thank you. Councillor Charlie.
Diolch, Cadeirydd, the Barod Pawb. Yeah, these are clearly very important reports, but they're also quite complex in nature. So I'm going to ask our Strategic Director, Amanda, to take us through them, and then if I can comment at the end of each report, Chair, if that's okay.
Yeah, Councillor. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Charlie. Yeah, so starting then, obviously I'm conscious you'll be hearing my voice a lot today with the next 4 reports, but starting with the capital programme 23-24 outturn position. So as members will be aware, the original capital programme obviously was agreed back in March. It was then amended and monitored through the year, so that at the last time Finance and Resources and Cabinet considered it, the capital programme stood at 122.679 million, which is a very significant capital programme for us as an authority. I would just stress actually part of the reason it's so large, if you compared it to others, is because obviously of our coastal risk management programme, which is significant within it. Since the last report, there have been amendments to the programme which in net terms equal 2.261 million, and they're detailed in Appendix 1. You'll be familiar, every quarter there are adjustments to the capital programme, often and mainly because we get grants, new grants in, or amendments to grants, and or because of other decisions that we're taking, or in fact because certain things drop out of the programme for various reasons. So there's been net additions of 2.261, and they're detailed in Appendix 1. Essentially, the report reports what the actual spend was. So the actual spend was 42.982 million. There was also a little bit of advanced spending of the previous year's budget. So by the time you sort of adjust for those things, then effectively there is a remaining budget of that previously agreed programme of 81.958 million, which has been carried forward into 24-25. I have, I think, commented in the report that 81.958 will be subject to review in this next quarter, just to make sure that in fact all of those carry forwards are still required. In that some of them might have actually completed without us, from an accountant's point of view, realising, and there might be some residual amendments. And to the extent that there are amendments, then obviously I'll reflect those in the next quarter's report. Table 1 also sets out how we finance that spend. So essentially, we've borrowed 24 million against that 42 million, and there's been a minor bit of use of reserves, etc. But essentially, the balance of it, 18 million plus, is from grants and contributions. I would also just again though reference that within the borrowing, the element of borrowing, 85% of the spend on the Crump schemes is done through borrowing, although Welsh Government have given us funding for that. So again, the borrowing includes that borrowing that would have happened on the Crump schemes to the extent we spent that. So just to reflect that. So the detail of all the individual services in terms of outturn and the carry forwards are then set out in Appendix 2. Obviously happy to take any questions. I don't know, it's back to you, Charlie.
Yeah, thank you, Amanda. Thanks for a really detailed report. I am supportive of the carryover, but I think we do need to look again, as Amanda said, in the next quarter to see whether our priorities are where they should be. Clearly, all these schemes have merit, but in a difficult financial situation, we have to be really laser focused on where that money is best spent. The crump issue, we live in a beautiful county, but it's got the largest defended artificial coastline in the country. And whilst that's 85% funded by Welsh Government, we still have to find 15%, which is a significant expense for this council. So I'm supportive of the recommendations, Chair. I'm sure there'll be some questions around the individual elements of it, so I'll get over to members.
Yeah, Charlie. Members, questions, please. Oh, is that Councillor Andrew online? First question. Councillor Andrew.
Thank you, Councillor Cheryl. I don't think the videos were very good today, but just quick on the carryover the element. Obviously, we're probably not going to spend that. I've noticed it's quite an in-depth report, and there's about 3 reports, but it all seems to be, the carryover seems to be lumped in 24-25. Some of these are long-term reports. Why are they not carried over onto 25-26? And also, as you rightfully said there, Charlie, some of these probably won't go forwards, or they may be streamlined. And I'd be interested to know that the amount of money that came from the reserves from heads of service when Amanda delved into them, and I think she's centralised all the reserves now. I'm sorry these questions might go over a couple of reports here, but there's a lot of stuff I read there this morning, and if anybody else can separate it all, you're a better person than I am, yeah? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Andrew. And we're enjoying the soft focus on your video as well.
Just in the context of the question about the programme, going into 24-25. I mean, effectively, as you rightly say, Councillor Andrew, the spend probably won't all happen in 24-25. It probably will happen over 24-25, 25-26, and maybe even into 26-27 with some of these schemes, because obviously they are, obviously particularly the crump schemes are very extensive construction works that will take a number of years. So in one sense, the I haven't got a breakdown at this point about which year in particular we anticipate that spend to happen, albeit obviously I have made assumptions around the speed at which I believe it's going to be spent, because obviously that plays into other figures around how much interest I think we're going to incur and all of that kind of stuff. So, but we discuss each time we meet with services to discuss the capital budgets that they hold and the spend that they're incurring. We seek to get a profile over which the spend will be incurred in order to give us that more accurate position, and we'll be looking again to refresh that over this next quarter. So hopefully in the next report we'll have a little bit of a better idea about the actual likely spend profile. But the scheme in it, the carry forward is just reflecting that budget, that a scheme will cost X, regardless of the profile of when it will be spent in reality. In terms of the carry forward, the carry forwards in the context of are they all needed still? Again, we'll be doing that detailed review, and I think obviously all of these schemes that are in the programme have previously been approved by council as part of the budget setting process. So I think to the extent that perhaps when I am and the accountants discuss with services, I think if there are any where perhaps we feel maybe the time's moved on and is it a priority for us still, then I'll be looking to bring that back in the context of any decisions, because clearly it's not my decision to say something shouldn't go forward if council have previously approved it. So I'll again be reflecting back on that in the next quarter's programme.
Okay,
The questions
thanks
about, sorry, I was just going to say, in terms of the questions on reserves, perhaps better to deal with that when we get to the revenue report.
Okay, thanks very much. The only thing I would say to add to that, looking at these detailed reports, is obviously a lot of the departments haven't spent the money that's been allocated to them in budgets, and I just worried that because it shows you different columns for borrowing and so on and so forth. We have obviously we haven't borrowed money and we're waiting on projects. Hopefully, we're just awaiting, I don't know, contracts to start. But it does seem that a lot of things in the ERF have not started. There's a lot of money allocated, but it's not started, and that happened last year as well.
Yeah, I think it's a fair reflection here, and to tell the truth, across most other local authorities, that actually there's often slippage in the timing of when capital is spent, and I guess that happens for a whole variety of reasons. Certainly when you look at major construction works, I think planning often is a reason things slip. Certainly, I know, for instance, in social care, some of the social care developments have slipped because of planning issues. So, I think there's a whole variety of issues why things slip. And I think, as I said, I don't think we as an authority are an outlier in that sense. But I think, yeah. I mean, it's an absolutely valid point that I think we need to be making sure that. If somebody's secured a budget a couple of years ago and they've still not spent it, well, is it still a priority for us as an authority? Because if we haven't got ahead and spent it in the last 2 years, well, maybe it wasn't as pressing as all that after all. So I do think we do need to potentially re-challenge and reassess to make sure that everything in the capital programme is definitely needed. In the context of, do we borrow in advance of spend? No, we don't. We effectively only borrow to fund our cash flow effectively. So we only borrow, once the spend has happened. The only area actually though where there is a consideration about whether we borrow in advance is around, again, some of the Crump schemes, because the problem with the Crump schemes is that whilst Welsh Government are funding us at 85%, we carry the risk on interest with that. So they crystallise what they believe we will incur in interest at the point they give us the offer. So if the offer is on a day when interest is running at 5%, then that's what we get. If it runs at 2%, then that's what we get. So obviously, if we don't lock in borrowing on that same day, then we are running the risk of the interest changes positively and negatively. So that's an area that we consider. I mean, but I guess also just to observe that to the extent we have borrowed and we are holding cash, then obviously we are able to invest that in the market as well. So in that context, hopefully any investment income received would offset any interest payable because they roughly run in at the same level. So, but in general principle, we don't borrow in advance, but on certain circumstances, there might be a legitimacy to do that.
Thank you, Amanda. I'm very assured by that. Thank you, Chair, for letting me speak on that one. And I look forward to, Amanda, if you can, having a look at these capital projects and see if where we can revisit them. The reason being is all the financial pressure we've got coming through for this year and next year. If this can be, it would be seen to be, it would be a good way for council to reflect on what's actually going to happen in the future from spending. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Andrew. Thank you, Amanda. Joe is next online. Joe Nuttall. Thank you. And then Councillor Gareth in the room.
Diolch. Thank you for letting me speak, as I'm not a member of this committee. Particularly interested in any potential overspend in the coastal improvements at Ross-on-Sea. Am I correct that the initial agreement was 20 million, of which the Welsh Government would pay 85 and we would obviously pay the 15? Have we gone anywhere near that now? What is our total spend so far? And also, can we have reassurance that the long-term maintenance will not be passed on to the Town Council and that there is a maintenance budget in place? Obviously, there's some quite hefty equipment along there. General things like the planters and things, whether that's a budget there for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Joe. In terms of the full business case that was approved by Welsh Government for the Ross-on-Sea scheme, I think, as you say, was around 20 million. I don't have the exact figure with me today. We haven't yet spent all of that. I think from memory, there might be around 2 million of the scheme still to be spent, which we anticipate will be spent in the current financial year and completed. So as far as I'm aware at this moment, and far as I'm concerned, it's not overspent. We're still operating within budget, and I've no reason to believe from the service that there's any expectation that it will be overspent. And obviously, I'd be quite concerned myself if that was the case. In terms of the ongoing maintenance, I'm unfortunately not cited on that. So if you perhaps leave it with me, I'll discuss it with the service, and we can give you a written response.
Thank you, Amanda. Have we got anyone from ERF online that could answer those questions? Have we got Geraint or anybody? Councillor Gromway, have you got any ideas about this, about the ongoing maintenance and any overspend? Thank you.
Not with me at this moment. No, I'll respond once we've looked into it.
Pardon?
I'll respond once we've looked into it. I had no notice of the question.
Right, okay, thank you. I did think that we were going to have heads of service here to answer any of these questions, but we'll get those in writing to them after this meeting. Thank you, dear Councillor Joe. Councillor Gareth in the room. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the report, Amanda. It's a big capital programme, and the extra £24.7 million worth of borrowing that we've taken on this year, by the look of it, is a big chunk of borrowing. I know a lot of it is funded. So, is my understanding right that you're really comfortable now with the way we've managed the interest rate risk on the Crump funding? Because I know when it was taken out when interest rates were low, we were in, it was actually costing us money, even though we had amounts allocated there. And if interest rates fall, will we benefit from that falling interest rate because we'll have locked in at a higher rate? And my second question is, in Appendix 1, at the end of Appendix 1, there's £475,000 looks as if it's been taken out of reserves for things like the Arias Park, track, paddling pools, swimming pools are some of the, they're fairly small amounts, but they do add up to almost £500,000 taken out of reserves. Now, are those overspends, or were the reserves in place there to be spent anyway? I'm just trying to get my head around it.
So just to answer you about the Crump thing first. We haven't. Right, so the first two Crump schemes, when we were given the offers with those letters, the interest rates were running at about 2%, and we are carrying therefore the interest rate exposure on those for the minute. But the later schemes have been offered at 5%, and therefore we are currently, in liaison with our advisors, we're currently, I guess, waiting for the interest rates to fall in order to lock in that money, which will then offset and compensate for the fact we've got interest rate exposure on the other ones. We've recently just taken out some borrowing when the interest rates went down last week to try and get a little bit of surety, but obviously we're waiting at the moment, not wanting to lock in too much at 4.5% when there might be a promise of 3%, coming down the line. So it is a bit of a waiting game to sort of try and get the best set up for the authority, and I mean, clearly, we'd all be multimillionaires and not sat here if we could read the markets exactly and invest at exactly the right time. But yeah, so that's what we're trying to do at the moment, is we're trying to use the Crump money to do with the second lot to slightly offset the interest risk that we've got with the first lot. So that's what we're doing with that, and hopefully that'll pay some dividends in the future. In terms of the bits that were funded from reserve at the bottom of that Appendix 1, yes, some of those were budgeted in the context. There was always an expectation. There was always an expectation to fund those costs from revenue, but we've transferred the money into capital because the spend is of a capital nature. I think there were a couple to do with the for instance, the Llandudno swimming pool floor repairs, where that was a capital scheme that came quite late to our attention, but fortunately, leisure services had generated substantial savings through the displacement on the SPF funds, and as a result of that, they were able to fund that from revenue. So effectively, and if you well, in fact, the outturn position on revenue shows that economy and culture were underspent. So they were underspent despite having funded those transfers to capital in order to fund those bits of sort of unforeseen costs.
Thanks, Amanda. Going back to the Crump stuff, I know it's really, really difficult balancing act, but are we looking to match the interest rates that we're locking into to the actual terms of the loans, or are we having to go shorter? Because there's still that, because they're long-term loans, we've got to be alive to the fact that if we are exposing ourselves to some risks over 20 years, that, at least we understand the risks we're taking when it comes down to it.
Yeah. I think I think in particular in relation to the Crump spend, then yeah, I think we're looking to match to some extent, the loans to the length of the scheme effectively, so that we have got that surety on that big cost. But obviously, we also to some extent are looking, and Gareth might be able to answer this better than I can really, but because obviously we've got a current loan profile, we've also got to, obviously certain loans are maturing, so we've got to replace those, etc. So to some extent there's a bit of sort of trying to manage our overall loan profile as well, and obviously we're seeking advice and obviously using the advice of our Treasury advisors in that respect, as well as our own professional view. I don't know if you want to add anything, Gareth.
Yeah, no, I think you pretty much covered it. What we don't want, obviously, is all our loans maturing at the same time. So we're trying to spread that refinancing risk really by making sure that there is a staggered effect into the future. And you're quite right in terms of the long-term nature of that. You're talking 25, 30 years, and you'll be familiar from the Treasury reports that go to governance and audit. There is a table in there which shows that maturity profile, trying to balance that out as time progresses.
Next, yes, Councillor Paul, thank you. Oh, microphone, Councillor Paul.
Thank you for letting me speak, as I'm not a member of the committee. Just want to focus on the risk implications and the paragraph on that, paragraph 11.3. Two issues. I suppose I'm really asking the question of Charlie on this. It says the risk that we do not have a strategic vision for our assets. Now, I know we've debated this over the last couple of years. When are we going to get this strategic vision for our assets report? Because that seems to me quite significant. And I was noticing in the revenue budget report in relation to assets, that is an area where, because we have delayed disposal of assets, there are really quite some significant revenue implications of that. I think best part of 400,000 in the revenue budget, which is an overspend on that. So that's one question, the strategic vision. The other one is on the school situation, which I think we have debated in different forums at some length. This problem of the risk of deterioration of school buildings and less repair and maintenance grant for sustainable communities for learning from Welsh Government, and the tortured nature of social care and education capital programme board dealing with this. I would like to see a specific report on the risk implications for that, because it appears to me that we're all living on this sort of situation that any time in the next 12 months, there will be school building problems, and we've only got a limited budget to deal with them, and then we're constantly juggling what is the biggest priority at this date, and it feels very uncomfortable. And for some schools, like in my area, I know the schools have been waiting for nearly 30 years to get their asbestos removed, and it always gets knocked back because there's a more pressing thing to deal with. But after 30 years, asbestos removal does become quite a priority.
Thank you, Councillor Paul. Councillor Charlie.
So a report on the SIPFA work is coming in September, and asset management strategy was part of that, Paul. I agree with you that we need to have that tightened up, that we know exactly what we're doing and how we're moving forward, and the process is slicker. In terms of our schools, I mean, clearly, I've gone around a lot of the schools with Councillor Julian, and the fabric isn't great. Yeah, it's really disappointing that they weren't able to deliver the new schools in our area. Obviously, that cost went from 9 million to 30 million. Without extra funding, that's going to be really difficult. You are pushing things back. But that is the situation we're in. You know, we don't have much choice. We have to try and do the best with what we've got. So yeah, there's lots of difficulties. I don't necessarily say, you know what, there's no magic wand that's going to make those go away without this council getting substantial capital funds to invest. And as Gareth has highlighted, even the Crump funding, the difficulties how that's actually paid to us, our reliance on interest rates and on elements that are outside our control is really challenging. But yeah, certainly the range you want to pick up on this sort of thing.
Yeah, I think you're quite right, Councillor Paul. We've debated and discussed our assets and the strategy behind it for quite a while now, and it's something that is a priority. It is one of my priorities. The work that's being currently undertaken with SIPFA will feed into that strategy. So we are working with SIPFA to engage with them to try and assess what we have and then feed that into a strategy moving forward, which will require us to be more slick, better in terms of how we deal with our assets, because we're in a different time, aren't we, to where we were 5 years, 6, 7 years ago. It's completely different now. And I was reading reports yesterday actually around local authorities in England where there's fire sales going on left, right and centre of assets in order to fund various things. Now, I'm not a big fan of that. I think it needs to be done in a strategic way to enable us to address the issues that we have moving forward. You know, I'm sure Amanda would reiterate that, you know, getting capital in can help in terms of capitalization, in terms of transformation, all that kind of stuff. But we need the appropriate strategy in place. So I'm hoping, and I don't want anyone to think that work hasn't been going on. I know under Katie, work has been going on to look at different options around the strategy. But the SIPFA work is pretty essential there. So I'm not sure that will report in September. The report in September will be about what we're doing, but that will give an indication of the timescale. So I'm hoping that will help.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think I'm still finding it very difficult to reconcile the fact that the 540k from the Welsh Government R&M grant, repairs and maintenance, has been fired over to a new build when our schools are clearly crying out for the repairs and maintenance. I have to say, I find that decision baffling, and of course it didn't come through democracy. So that is a real worry that there was money there to do these works and it's been fired away. So that's one to, I'm sure, come back to in the future. Have we got any more questions? Anybody? No? Okay then, thank you very much. We now look at the recommendations on page 61, 2.1, that the F&R Overview and Scrutiny Committee scrutinise, consider and note the content of the report and make recommendations to Cabinet. And then 2.2, 2.3 and 2.4 are for Cabinet to decide. Have we got any recommendations, any proposals? We're very quiet this morning, members. No one got any thoughts on this? Anyone? No, doesn't look like we have any recommendations then. No proposers. Well, that's a legal officer. What do we do now?
I've never known a situation where nobody has got anything to say on any of the plans.
No.
We need a proposer and a seconder in order for finance, resources and overview and scrutiny to consider the report. So you have considered the report. Are we making any recommendations
We have
or
it
are
up
we?
online? Thank you, Kerry. Councillor Chris Hughes online.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in order to move the report on, I'll propose the recommendations as found in 2.1, 2.2, 2.3 and 2.4. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Chris. Yes, just 2.1 that we need for this meeting. Have we any seconders online? Councillor Frank online. Okay. So we have a proposer and a yeah.
Just for clarity, it is appropriate to move the other recommendations
Yeah.
as well, if that is if that's what the committee wants. Yeah, so they can move 2.1 through to 2.4. Yeah.
I think that's what, yes, Councillor Chris has done that. We've had a seconder from Councillor Frank online. Would everyone like to show and support? One, two, three, four. How many have you online, Dawn? 5 in the room and 6 online. Have we got anybody voting against? Any abstentions? That's carried then. Thank you. Thank you, members. We now move on to item 7B, the revised capital programme 24-25 Q1 monitoring report, pages 82 to 101. It's Councillor Charlie is going to briefly introduce, and then it's Amanda again.
Yeah, the there. So obviously we've dealt with last year's outturns. So there's a progress report in the current quarter for the financial year moving forward. So I'll hand over to Amanda. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, so as Charlie says, this just now moves into the first quarter. So effectively, this report then reflects the capital budget that was approved by Council for 24-25, which was approved in February. And you'll recall that was to approve capital schemes for 14.138 million and also 1.655 for the following year. To that then, on the assumption or on the presumption for the minutes, obviously, that the approval from the previous report goes forward, then that brings then forward that carry forward of the 81 million. And then once again, there are a number of revisions that have happened since the start of the year, and they're predominantly around grant funding, new grant funding that has come in. So and they're net additions then of 4.085, and in the same vein as before, Appendix 1 details those net additions specifically for clarity, and Appendix 2 then has the detailed schemes by service, and then just to report that up until the end of June, we've spent £4 million against this budget. So yeah, looking in the same vein as last time for approval around the additions, and effectively to note and confirm the overall programme, which would now stand at 101 million.
The Amanda. Okay, members, you've read the report. Have we got any questions, please? Councillor Gareth first. Thank you.
Thanks once again, Amanda. I'll just go through my questions in the order that they actually appear on the report. So in Appendix 1, we've got pay and display machines, 99,000 has appeared in that. Again, just, what's the, is there a business case for that, and what sort of payback are we looking for and where are they going to be placed? At the end of Appendix 1, there's a big variation in there. It looks as if Welsh Assembly Government have actually reduced our housing allocation by 4.182 million for housing development. Just trying to understand why that was, because to the best of my knowledge, we haven't sorted the housing issues out, and that is a big, big figure. I'm hoping you're going to tell me it's actually just been moved to another section, so that it comes under another guise, because if we've lost that, then it's going to make a huge difference to us. And then in Appendix 2, it looks as if we're looking to borrow £250,000 to do some work on 7 Abergele Road. I thought we'd had a load of grants spent on buildings around that area. And again, you know, do we make proper business cases on that? Is the rent going to go up? You know, what return on investment are we getting from a building like that, where we actually borrow £250,000 against it? I suspect that the under-20 rugby's hosting fee at £50,000 in there is an anomaly that probably should have been taken out. And also, you know, we touched on the fact that we're talking about some really, really big schemes. On page 97, we've got the transport fund. When, you know, I know it's good value for money. We've got 20 million altogether being spent on the transport schemes in Betws-y-Coed and Glanconwy and places like that, which is good, but we've still got borrowing there of 2.67 million. So it's a big chunk of borrowing when, as we know from stuff that we've got coming up, we're really under pressure under revenue. So whatever borrowing we've got, under no illusions, we have to pay it back. And it does put pressures on revenues. So I'm just wondering again, can we actually afford some of these big schemes going forward? Have we actually started them? And, you know, I know we talk about looking at them next quarter to make sure they're doing it. I say we should do that with haste and really have a proper evaluation of what can we afford, what can't we? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gowthorpe. So to just talk about those in order then. So the pay and display machines. So that's one where effectively, obviously I must confess, Hugh, do you know what the life pay and display machines are? I don't know what the life of them is. I'll have to go away and find that. But effectively, ERF have within their revenue budget a budget effectively to repay the debt relating to the cost of pay and display machines. So effectively, the previous loan effectively that was on the ones that are having to be replaced has now dropped away. So effectively, that's allowing therefore the replacement to take place, and the new debt will be funded from the budget that's now free from the old debt dropping out as the previous ones have finished their life. I think, I say, I rather than me guess, I think I'll get the detail from the department about the length of service. In terms of a business case, effectively, I discussed that in detail with ERF. I have a delegated ability to approve £100,000 under the Constitution, and because it was a fully funded scheme, I approve that as part of my delegation. In terms of the housing one, that's actually a little bit of a misnomer there. So it's a correction for presentational purposes to the budget. So just to explain what happened originally, when we originally put that budget in, it was put in on the assumption we would attract, it was put in a couple of years ago now, and it was put in on the assumption we would attract a big chunk of TACP money. And I think if my memory serves me right, we put in about 2 million of our own funding and then about 6 million of TACP funding. And during this last year, we were successful, and we received some TACP funding, and we've used some of our underlying budget matched with TACP to go forward. What was left effectively? What was left then was the remaining budget of our spend, you know, the bit we were putting in, and then a nominal and notional TACP funding. But I just took a decision from an accounting point of view to take that out presentationally, because actually at the moment we haven't secured that funding because the Welsh Government's TACP scheme, we've done the TACP for last year. We will no doubt apply for future, but rather than just show a figure which is not actually matched by a real grant letter, but merely an intention, I decided to take it out, and when we actually get a grant letter for TACP funding, then I'll bring the real grant in. I just didn't see the point of having a notional figure that wasn't represented by an actual real grant offer. So, but just to assure you, in the context of our plans and our programme, the money that we'd put aside from the county council to fund is still there in the budget. It's merely I've just taken out the notional grant until we actually secure it. So that was a correction in that sense. The 250,000 for Abergele Road, whilst that is showing as borrowing, and it will be borrowing, we did actually receive grant funding for that. We received grant funding a number of years ago, and what we did, because we hadn't been able to spend it at the time, was it was displaced. So effectively, in the year we received the grant funding, we used that grant funding not for the purpose it was given, but for some other purpose that we would have borrowed against. And effectively, we swapped it out so that the money we got the grant for when we actually spend it will be funded by grant. So sorry, by borrowing. So that's one of those displacements. So whilst it shows as borrowing, we have previously had grant money for it, which we've matched against something else. So just to explain that one. The under 20 hosting fee absolutely is one of those which I would be anticipating to correct out this next time. And in terms of the 20 million levelling up, I mean, obviously, we made an application supported by the authority to apply for and secure that levelling up money, and obviously it was we actually put 3 applications in. We only got the one, and obviously it's a fantastic scheme, but did require us to put 10% match funding in. I guess as time's moved on, maybe a different decision might have been taken today compared to several years ago, but at this point we're committed to the scheme. So,
was that all your questions, Councillor Gareth?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, I think I understand what you're talking about, the displacement of the grant money being taken up by a loan, because basically if we didn't actually spend the money on that building, then we'd have to give the grant money back, which we've already spent on something else. So do we have a feel as to how much of that displaced grant money we've got within the authority where we're obliged and committed to be taking new loans out because we've actually had the money in and spent it on other things?
I think across the capital budget, there's actually about £11 million of displaced grant money. When you say we've spent it on other things, just to confirm, that has been done with the approval and permission of the grant awarding body. So we have to seek their approval to displace. We can't just decide to do it ourselves. But obviously, in having sought their approval to displace, they are obviously monitoring and continuing to monitor our actual delivery of the scheme that they paid for.
Yeah, suggest that you use it wrongly, you're using it wisely. But again, as a council, we've got to be very aware of the fact that the reality is we are committed to borrowing another £11 million on grant monies that we've actually had in, that we're either holding as balances or offsetting against other schemes. So, it's another big chunk of borrowing there that we've got almost in the shadows in the background, isn't it, that we're going to have to take out?
Yes, although it's within the programme. It's within this programme. It's not that it's on top of. It's within the programme.
Thank you, Mandy. Before I bring Councillor Charlie in, just on that 7 Abergele Road, so the extra, that's not to do with all the roof issues that they're currently having, all the leaks in the roof. That's not extra because of all those issues they're having there at the moment.
It would be my understanding that that's what the cost will be to sort all that out. My understanding is, yeah. But in terms of the grant, are you? I suppose you're saying, well, when we we had grants that was sufficient to pay for it. So yeah.
Thank you, Amanda. Councillor Charlie.
Yeah, just on your last point about the levelling up fund, Gareth, you know, my opinion is it was really badly run. There was only 1 in 3 applications across the UK were successful. So there's an awful lot of councils spent an awful lot of money putting projects forward. There wasn't that ability locally to say, well, this is our, you know, this is the one we want. We were sort of, timetables were short, information was short. Our neighbour Flintshire didn't get any. So, you know, it's been a really difficult process. And then you're facing that need to spend it in a hurry. Things taking a longer time can cost more, but they can also cost less. If you're all fighting with the same contractors to try and get a piece of work done, it's not a good use of money. And the real big concern is, again, we don't know what's going to replace it sort of March next year. So obviously we've used a lot of shared prosperity fund to displacement some activities, which has worked really well, as you can see in the revenue report. But without knowing what's going to replace it, how much we're going to get, you know, that's another challenge that we're going to face, because obviously a lot of those contracts are going to run down very quickly and people need some sort of job security. So I know WLGA has written to the Deputy Prime Minister highlighting the difficulties that's going to cause us and sort of asking for some urgency as to what's going to happen next so we can make some plans.
Yeah, I think my point was that, yeah, doom and gloom. Do we need to look at that again and say, actually, can we actually afford it now? You know, I
think in the round, I think we need to look at other capital spending.
We do.
It's very difficult to turn down £20 million, you know, and it is that balance, isn't it? We've seen some of the investment we've made in our leisure services. We've got record numbers of people joining that. You know, that's working really well. That hopefully the service will be revenue neutral in a year or two. That's their aim, but they're only going to get that by investing and getting more income in. So it's a difficult balance, isn't it? You can throw the baby out with the bathwater saying we don't want that money, we're going to stop it. Tourism is vitally important for us. I'm fortunate to be in France the last couple of weeks and people cycle everywhere up and down on their holiday. So that it's a difficult balance, isn't it? But I absolutely take your point.
Thank you, Councillor Charlie. Okay.
Just coming on 7 Abergele Road.
Yes, if you like. I'm feeling generous.
Thank you. I think we need to acknowledge the project management of 7 Abergele Road was very problematic because we struggled to find a tenant. We then found a tenant, but the tenant that moved in, though it's been very successful, the Inc. project there, they had major problems because of not only the roof problems, but the black mold problems as a consequence of the roof problems. And if that work had been part of the original specification and scheduled in, we wouldn't be in this dilemma that we are now in. So again, I think it's a reminder. I know that project manager's left now, but it's a reminder of the financial consequences of project management going wrong, which we've had 1 or 2 in the authority.
Thank you for that, Councillor Paul. Yes, local knowledge always very much appreciated. Okay, we'll now move on to Councillor Andrew online. What's your questions, please, Councillor Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. I'm on page 89. I can read reports quite well, but I'm struggling with this one a little bit. So there's 2 questions. There's a capital reserves for the different headings of getting on towards 829,000, and I'm struggled to see, and this is probably goes into reserves report to find out why they're not held by Amanda and her team. But anyway, getting back to environment, roads and facilities, one of our biggest expenditures. Can Amanda just go through the different headings? Because it says original council 29th of February, capital outturn. Presumably, I don't understand that because you got that figure and then you've got the restated estimated outturn. So can you just go through the figures and where they come from? So, because they don't seem to balance or add up to me.
Thank you, Councillor Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew. Right, so just on the capital reserves column, those amounts of money are sat in our capital reserves, which show up later on the reserves report. But effectively, in that column, it's not that they're held by services. What that is shown on page 89 is just the anticipated way that those the capital budget is going to be financed, and within the whole of the financing of £101,000, there is 829 anticipated to come from capital reserve. So that's what that's showing. In terms of the opening two columns, yeah, in retrospect, I apologise. In retrospect, I probably could have made this a little bit clearer. So effectively, the original council budget is the budget that was approved for 24-25 in March. Sorry, the 29th February it was, wasn't it? So that of 15,793. The restated estimate outturn is effectively what the capital budget now stands at once you've carried forward. So it's the 15,793 plus the 81 million. I'm just hoping that's in a table in the report. Yeah, it is. Phew. In table 1 on page 84, it sets it out. So effectively, it's the 15,793 which was approved for 24-25 in February, plus the 81,958 which was carried forward. Or will be carried forward subject to Cabinet's approval from the report that we've previously discussed. So effectively the unspent previous year's cumulative budget carried forward. I've then taken off 193,000 because actually last year there was advanced spending of some of this year's budget. So if they've already spent it, they can't have it again. So I've taken that off. And then I've added on that net impact of that 4,085, which this report details in Appendix 1, which is the new schemes coming from grant funding, a little bit from additional internal funding and some reductions. So effectively, going back to the table you were looking at, the first column was the budget in 24-25. The second column was the cumulative of all of those different bits. I accept, probably on reflection, I maybe should have put some extra columns to make it a little bit clearer, but it is explained there in table 1. So I hope that helps.
Councillor Andrew?
Yeah, still confused. The figures I've looked, I've scrolled between the two tables and they don't seem to interact with themselves. So I'll leave it at that. I trust Amanda knows what she's doing, but I can't read it. Okay.
Is the further, Andrew, do you want to ask your further questions? Because it's important that when we vote on this, you're absolutely clear what you're
if Amanda's happy with that table 1 on page 84, that's if all those figures are correct, I'm happy to carry on to the vote. It's just the figures in the table, which is on Appendix 2. I can't make head and tail of where they come from, to be honest. That's the problem. There is no community. If it doesn't tell you where they come from, doesn't tell you what's taken away, where it's come from. So, yeah. So sorry, Chair, but I'm happy to trust.
No, you have to be absolutely clear what you're voting on, Councillor Andrew.
Yes, I do.
Amanda?
Yeah, just to, as I say, Councillor Andrew, apologies that I didn't put more clarity in the table, but just to give you some comfort, just to clarify for definite. So on page 89 you'll see that the revised estimate outturn figure at the bottom is 101.643 million. And if you go then back up to table 1, you can see midway down then that same figure, 101.643 million. So effectively that's confirming that's the capital programme as it would now stand. And in table 1 above that you can see it broken down. So it's the 81.958 carried forward, take away the 193 that was spent in advance, add on the approved 24-25 capital programme of the 15,793, and then the amendments of the 8050, the 219, and the minus 4184, which have happened in the first quarter, and that equals then that total programme of 101 643. So I appreciate I've explained that quickly, but I can, I can give you comfort and assurance that I am happy personally with the figures, and I've spent a lot of time poring over them myself with the accountants to make sure that they're right. So I hope that provides a little bit of extra assurance.
Thank you, Amanda. It does. It's just the one I was struggling with was the fourth one down, environmental roads and facilities. And those actual figures, they're just figures then. There's no computations in those figures. They're just figures in relation to the table in page 84, presumably then, yeah?
Yes. I mean, obviously, the table one on page 84 is giving you the whole program. So obviously, if you look specifically at ERF, then elements of all of those figures will relate to ERF, as will elements relate to economy and culture or education, etc. So cumulatively, they all that table just shows the cumulative position. But yes, if you were to take the elements in each of those figures relating to each of the services and added them together, then they would give you those individual figures on the services. So yeah, apologies that I haven't provided that clarity of detail in the report, but I can assure you that it does all add up and reconcile.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not very good at adding up things like that and then moving into different reports, but yeah, I do trust Amanda. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Andrew. Next, we have Councillor Anne online. Councillor Anne.
Thanks, Chair. It's just a smaller point, Amanda, because I think my biggest issue were around risk, and Councillor Paul's explored that and you've responded. But on page 90, there is a heading which is Victoria Pier Phase 3. Can you just talk to that? And it's an insignificant amount of money in terms of it's just sort of £9,000. I'm just concerned about potentially expectation management and what's our liability around further investing in developing this pier, given our perilous financial position. Thanks, Amanda.
Unless you, my colleague in the room, can answer, I'll have to come back to you on that, Councillor. And I'm not au fait with the devil of the detail specifically on that. I'm sure there's a valid reason for it to be there, but I'll take it you don't know. No. Yeah, I'll have to come back and give you a written response on that, Councillor, and apologies.
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks, Amanda.
Councillor Gromway, I know you have a long history with this. Have you any ideas about this?
There's not a project I've been involved in, so I will leave Amanda reply with the necessary information.
Okay, thank you. Have we got any further questions from members? No. Okay, then we now move on to the recommendations. On page, let's have a look, recommendations on page 83. Have we got a proposer and a seconder? Councillor Neer, Councillor Gareth. Sorry, question.
I was just going to ask, is it appropriate, because I think we should formally put down that we're going to review the programme in the next quarter with a focus on any schemes with additional borrowing?
That's a proposal to add.
I know it's in the body of the report, but I just wondered whether as a committee we needed to put it in there, or would it just...
So that's a recommendation that you're making.
That would be my recommendation.
So, sorry, Councillor Gareth, can we just clarify exactly what you would like to propose?
That I'd like to propose that we actually formally note that the schemes are reviewed in the next quarter with a focus on the schemes that actually incur borrowing. I know within the report it says that we're going to do it, but I just feel that the financial position that we're in, that we need to formally put it down there. Obviously, other people may vote against it and say that we don't need to review them.
Well, given the financial situation, I think we should be looking to everything. The big question is, can we afford it going forward, isn't it? Can we do? And it doesn't look as though we can, given what's coming down the track. So we've had a proposal, an addition there from Councillor Gareth. Have we got a seconder for that, please?
Happy to second, Chair.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Anne. So how do this? Going to go with add that to. So that's the proposal to go with the ones that are also there on page 83. So we've had a proposer and a seconder.
Yeah, we just need to clarify whether there are any other proposals. The recommendation in the report has not actually been proposed. So we've got Councillor Gareth's, which is amending the proposal in the report.
Yeah, I'm happy
We
to.
have a seconder. Do we have any other proposals? No, then we can vote on them.
Okay, we can vote on. Yeah.
Just for clarity, when you say in the next quarter, the next quarter comes to an end at the end of September, doesn't it? So are we talking the next sort of few months rather than the next quarter? Yeah.
Well, I thought it was, because it's in the report that it would have been for September that the work.
Can't hear Chair online.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, because it's in the report. I thought some of the work will already be underway. Because again, because we'll talk about the other, where we are on revenues, but this, I think we need to be acting quickly with these things. But if it's completely unrealistic, there's absolutely no point us voting and doing it.
It was just clarity really on, and Amanda would be able to confirm.
Yeah, I'm happy to commit to make sure it comes through in the next quarter's report.
Thank you, Dale.
Thank you, Reen and Amanda. Okay, so we move to the vote on Councillor Garrett's proposal that was seconded by Councillor Anne. Could all members show in favour, please? Six. And three, 1, 2, 3, 4 in the room. Okay, and anyone voting against? No. Any abstentions? No. So that's carried. Thank you. Thank you, members, for that. We now move on to item 7C, the financial outturn 23-24, pages 102 to 127. Councillor Charlie's going to introduce. Councillor Charlie, you weren't able to get your comments in on this report, were you? So I don't know if you want to make a comment.
I'm not sure why, Chair. If I'm okay, I'd like Amanda to introduce the report, and then I'll make some comments then, if that's okay.
Lovely.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Amanda, you again.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, so this report is bringing you the financial outturn position for 23-24. There's quite a lot of stuff to go through in this report, so please bear with me. But so just to in the first instance just set out quickly the different aspects of the report. So obviously I'll talk about the detail in a minute, but just to say that in Appendix 1 then it shows the actual outturn figures against the budget. It shows two things. It shows the outturn against the budget, but it also then shows how it's changed since the previous quarter. And also in Appendix 2 then there is detail around the reserves and balances, which I'll come on to specifically once I've gone through the actual outturn position. So in terms of the outturn position, you'll recall that at Q3 we were forecasting an overspend of £1.7 million. The position, the actual final position, was more favourable than that, in that the excess of expenditure in excess of our income was 1.4 million, or 396 million. And also at the end of the year, our level of reserves and balances had actually increased by 8.461 million, albeit those that supported revenue had reduced by 3 million, albeit that was primarily in relation to the balances held by schools. So You'll be aware, just in terms of sort of some general technical stuff now, that we are required under accounting regulations to produce a statement of accounts, which by law we're required to produce those by the 31st of May. Following the 31st of March 2024 year end. But for a number of years now, I'll just go back a little bit. It used to historically be actually Christmas, 30th of December used to be the date it had to be done. Then it was brought back to September, and then it was brought back to June, and then it was brought back to May. And at the time it was brought back because UK government was pursuing what was called a faster closing agenda. Anyway, they seem to have changed their tune on that since the pandemic, and actually now the timetable is going back to being a bit more realistic. So although it still says in the actual regulations that local authorities have to produce the accounts by May, actually Welsh Government issued a revised timetable, which was an expectation that the accounts were produced by the end of June, and we met that requirement, but in accordance with the regulation, we published a notice on our website to explain why we hadn't met the 31st of June. However, we are aware that Welsh Government will be seeking to change the legislation so that it reverts back to being 30th of June in the legislation, and that will remove then any future requirement to publish notices, etc. Anyway, I digress. The key information, I guess, from your point of view, as I say, is that the outturn position was in the end 1.396 million. Now, whilst obviously that's still not good news, because obviously we ultimately have used balances and depleted our balances a little bit. It is actually a little bit more favourable than that, because we were able in spending that, or in needing to utilise that 1.4 million of reserves, we were also able to absorb some other costs which hadn't been included in the third quarter outturn. And I've set out in table 2 some of those key changes between the two positions, but the ones that I think of particular note are, you obviously have been keen to understand in this committee the implications of the redundancy costs to do with schools following decisions that needed to be taken in the context of setting balanced budgets in the schools in 24-25, and I've set out in paragraph 3.13 the implications of those redundancy costs. So effectively 18 schools made 51 employees redundant across both teaching and non-teaching roles. The vast majority of those redundancies were voluntary, and a small handful were compulsory, and the cost of all of those redundancies to the authority was £883,000. Just to note, however, that wasn't all payments to individuals. It also included for some what's called pension strain costs. So effectively, where a person is made redundant over the age of 55, and the nearer you are to 55, you are, then effectively the pension fund effectively is saying what the pension fund effectively says is, well, you've made a decision as an authority to let somebody go, and as a result of that, we are not going to get pension contributions that we had anticipated when we have done our actuarial evaluation, etc. So basically, you've now got to compensate the pension fund for the fact that you've made a decision which has lost us contributions, and that's what the pension strain is. So the total cost of both the payments that the individuals received directly plus the pension strain was £883,000. What I would say, I haven't reported it in here actually, but the ongoing budgetary saving was significantly higher than the pension strains. Than the cost. So in fact, it was paid back within a year, effectively. That was able to be funded from within the education budget. And in fact, you'll see from the outturn that even having funded the 883,000, central education's budget was still underspent by £361,000. So that was one of the key changes, and as I say, something that I know you're interested in. Another change was that there was an accounting adjustment in connection to some social care costs. Now, just to confirm on here, or just to confirm in relation to this, I'll explain what the accounting adjustment is, but just to confirm before I explain it in detail. Firstly, it's incidental. It relates to social care, so it's nothing to do with social care. I mean, obviously the costs relate to social care, but what I mean is the pressure is not of social care's making. It is incidental that it happens to be social care. So to make that point. Secondly, there is no issue in the context of the payments are completely legitimate, routinely made to the care providers. There's nothing amiss in any way, shape or form in relation to what that money has been spent on. So just to make those points absolutely clear. What it is effectively, you know, we're required in accounting terms to account for the expenditure and income that relates to the 1st of April to the 31st of March. We generate payments, or historically for the payments to the residential nursing care providers, we generate those payments, or we have historically, we've changed recently to weekly, but historically we've generated those payments every 2 weeks. So effectively a run has gone out every 2 weeks for 14 days worth of payments to the care providers. Now, so we've allocated, from an accounting point of view, we've allocated 26 runs to each financial year. So to account for the expenditure relating to that accounting year. However, you'll know that 26 times 14 equals 364, not 365. So what it's meant is that for a number of years, or for historically, the authority has always just allocated 26 fortnightly runs to each accounting period. But what it's meant is that each year, for the last decade or more, 1 day has been allocated to the wrong financial year, because 364 days has been allocated to 1 year, and the 1 day has then gone into the next financial year. What it's meant is by the time we've got to 23-24, is if we continue just allocating 26 weeks per year, is it actually meant that the whole of the last 2 weeks of March, we would have allocated to the next financial year. And I didn't feel comfortable accounting for what was very clearly the last 2 weeks of March in 23-24. I didn't feel comfortable accounting for that in 24-25. So what I have done is I have done effectively an accounting adjustment to catch up those allocations of the runs to the different accounting periods, to make sure that a run that relates very clearly to 23-24 is in 23-24. But what it's essentially done is caught up the, I guess what you would class as the under allocating of 1 day per year for the last, it probably isn't 14 years because you've also had a couple of leap years in there. So it's probably for the last 11 years, it's caught that up. So that's why I've put it in, and effectively that's caught that situation up. Now, to the extent of why I've you know, why that hasn't been noticed before, is I guess ultimately it's because each day has only had a day missing, as it were, and that's often the place, and you'll go across other authorities where in accounting terms you'll have a slight mismatch around the year end of maybe a day being posted to the old year and a day being posted to the new year, but generally speaking, providing you're charging the right number of days to each year, then it's fine. But as I say, I just felt by now that it had got so out of kilter that I felt it preferable to correct. and allocate that way. What I will make sure, what Gareth and I will make sure, is that going forward, we don't allow that build up again. That we will therefore make sure that 365 days are charged each year, so that we don't have another catch up a decade hence. But as I say, that it is purely an accounting adjustment. It's purely an allocating of legitimate costs towards one financial year compared to the other financial year. So that's why I don't want you to think there's nothing amiss remotely about the underlying payments, the legitimacy of the underlying payments. And as I say, it is incidentally happens to be relating to a social care cost. It's not of social care's making. So just to clarify that point. The other things then that I just want to quickly point out in terms of the change from position of the previous year. Education had grants that were able to maximise, which obviously improved the position and helped us fund through other budgets, obviously not through grant, those redundancies. There were additional pressures coming through from ERF, which in fact you can see are carrying on into the current financial year, which are obviously of concern. And in the end, we then did we were able successfully to displace some greater level of SPF than we previously anticipated. So that's produced additional income, and in the end, the final energy demand on our energy contingency was not quite as high. So all of those things meant that in net terms, we actually, as I say, only charged to balances again in the end 1.4 million, which was an improved position, notwithstanding obviously still depleting our reserves to some extent. I think it's also worth though pointing out, as I say, that given that we had those one-off costs to do with Storm Babette, because that in the end cost us £600,000 through a force of nature, plus the redundancies and the accounting adjustment, then actually, I think in fairness to services, I think it was positive that we managed to get to that position. Having said that, a number of key services were substantially over their budget through legitimate pressures, and it was offset from a number of central services and economy, culture and corporate budgets. And we can't rely on that in the future, because in fact, actually, as we've moved on, some of those things that have benefited us in 23-24, we've taken in as part of our budget setting in 24-25. So they won't necessarily be there for the future. Just also to touch on the school position. So the schools collectively, in the end, utilised 3.1 million of their collective school balances, which, whilst again, depleting their reserves from around 10 million to around 7 million, was again a more favourable position than I think schools had been predicting partway through the year, when I think they were anticipating using about 6 million of their reserves. So again, financial management there has sort of helped improve the position, albeit it's still no doubt a depletion of reserves. I think then just moving on then to the whole just one final thing then in terms of the actual outturn. I'd reported previously, and I reported again in Appendix 3, that of the 11.6 million planned savings that were built into the budget, we achieved 10.3 million of those, and the non-achievement of them predominantly were around home to school transport, and obviously some of the building costs that we'd hoped would be achieved sooner, and still pressures in housing. So when closing the accounts, obviously I've got to make appropriate and prudent financial provision and reserves, and so obviously we've made a range of accounting entries in that regard. And at the end of the year, our total reserves and balances stood at 57.739 million, which, as I say, was about 8 million higher than it stood at the previous year end, which is positive in its general general trajectory. But just to, as I flagged, in fact, the bulk of that reserve, those reserves, increase in reserves, was to do with capital, and some of that money is some of the advance payments around the coastal risk management programme, which obviously we need to keep aside. So it's not available money, and in fact our revenue reserves did decreased by 3 million, albeit the bulk of that was in schools as opposed to the other council's reserves. So in table 3, I've set out effectively the movement across the different parts of our reserves, and you can see, in fact, in terms of our revenue reserves, excluding schools, we've actually had a minor increase of 139. The schools reserves, as I say, have depleted, and the capital reserves have grown predominantly as a result of getting additional money to do with the crump, as I say, advance money to do with the crump. So what I've done is I've worked with heads of service, and I've reviewed all of the service and corporate earmarked reserves, and I'm proposing and recommending to you, obviously subject to your views and Cabinet's view, that we make a number of changes, and what they are then is that we I've set there out in paragraph 3.17. So effectively, I'm suggesting that we transfer the remaining 0.447 million, which is in a 23-24 pay reserve, into a general pay pressures reserve, so not specific to a year, that we transfer 412,000 that was in a historic renewal program reserve into a digital and other transformation reserve, that we transfer 0.8 million from a range of corporate reserves into a corporate building reserve, and that we transfer the balance effectively out of earmarked reserves into general balances. So I've set that out in detail in appendix appendix 2, I think it is it. Yeah, in appendix 2, which starts on page 113. You can see across the top. So I've got the in column 3, the opening balance, column 4, the closing balance, and the proposals I've just talked about are the proposals I'm suggesting there in column 5. So proposals that I'm recommending to you following my review with heads of service, where effectively it's taking back a range of earmarked reserves, which I believe to be, I guess, just historic pots of reserves, which might have been set up for a valid purpose originally, but that purpose no longer is there, and therefore I'm suggesting that you recoup those. So that if approved would take us to the balance in column 6, and what I've then done in column 7 and column 8 is I've split those out between what I believe in column 7 to essentially be earmarked, because it's either things like a shared reserve with an outside body that effectively we have to have, or maybe things like the insurance reserve, where we clearly have got to have money set aside for insurance claims, etc. But then in column 8, I've put categorized some as what I would say for consideration. So effectively, there is a planned use of those reserves by services that may well be legitimate, but equally there may well be a question about whether they are the priority for today. But I didn't feel it was for me to decide they weren't priorities. I felt that was a democratic decision, and therefore that's why I've left those in column 8 as being for consideration. Quickly then, just going back to the written report. So if the proposals that I've suggested in the column that I've suggested are approved, it leaves 28.311 million in earmarked reserves, and as I say, I've split those between those which are committed and those which you could choose to reprioritise, which equal 12.8 million. We still hold, no doubt, one of the lowest level of reserves in Wales. And we still have effectively, if you take our general balances plus those balances that I guess are there to support our resilience, so the budget recovery reserve, the pay pressure reserve, the transformation reserve, then effectively we have balances of around 12.8 million. That equates to around 4.35 of our net budget, and you'll be aware that it was approved last year as part of our reserve strategy that we would seek to have at least 5% in general reserve. So clearly we're still not at that level. We've clearly got new pressures in the current year against that, and I therefore am flagging at this point as well that I really think as part of the 25-26 budget, despite all of the other tremendous pressures that we're going to be facing, we really do need to work out how we're going to start how to start building reserves again. So as I say, and subject to any discussions about those reserves, whilst it's unfortunate we still had to use a small amount of reserve, it was positive in the end, and the position was better and more positive than had been anticipated at the third quarter. And I guess, in fairness, that's credit to services and everyone in taking appropriate action to try and mitigate and minimise overspending. And I say overspending, I don't think it is overspending. What it is spending in excess of the available resources that we have. But I think given the significant challenges, it was positive that we were able to absorb a number of those costs. Just in terms of going back to the process a little bit, obviously we've submitted the unaudited accounts now on the 30th of June. We have a commitment from Audit Wales that they will now do the statutory audit of the accounts before November, and hopefully the accounts will be able to be signed off in November, but we will await to see whether that happens. So thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you for that comprehensive run through the report, Amanda. Councillor Charlie, did you want to say anything before we went to questions?
Yeah, I just absolutely want to add my thanks to all our officers, because a huge amount of work has gone into bringing this figure down. Not only has it come down, we've been able to absorb the redundancy cost, the unexpected storm Babbitt, significant costs, but it still is an overspend. You can see it's a bit of a mixed bag. There are services which are demand led, so social care, housing. It's very difficult to constrain those budgets because we have to meet the need. But you've seen some really positive stuff from education in terms of accessing grant funding, economy and culture increasing their income and stuff like that. So some of it it's positive moving forward. Obviously, this stuff that's grant funded is always a concern that won't be available next year. So it's a pleasing result, but I'm absolutely supportive of Amanda's approach in terms of consolidating our reserves and being really mindful that we're celebrating an overspend of 1.3 million because the situation before looked a lot bleaker than it is, and clearly there's a lot more to be done moving forward. But it does show for me that we've taken this very, very seriously, and we've got steps in place to try and minimise any sort of budgetary implications for us, Chair. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Charlie, and thanks again for that, Amanda. I know all the work that's gone into this. Okay, questions, members. Is that Councillor Andrew online with his hand up first, then Councillor Gareth? Councillor Andrew.
Thank you, Councillor Cheryl. Chair. Just a quick one, Amanda. Just looking at the the consideration column 8 is 12,800,000. Yeah. Which table have you referenced that in as earmarked reserves? And it's from. And will Audit Wales want you to actually show that differently in the audit, as in it's allocated within head of service? So that's one real question for you. I'm a bit lost on that one. Well done on our reserves are £8.5 million more than they were last year, so that's a good outturn, and they've sizably grown since you came into post. So well done on that one. But one interesting thing is there's an amount of money there, 1.365 million, financing Ukrainian homes resettlement, which seems to be there. So if you can, I haven't seen any reference to spending it, and so I'm a bit lost on this for consideration. How are we going to consider? Who's going to consider it? We're going to bring it down as a separate report. Is it going to go to budgetary working practice? Obviously, Amanda, you rightfully said you don't want to. It's not you want a democratic decision on it. It's 12 million quid. That's a lot of money. I'll leave if you can just give me a steer on that. Thank you, Chair, for letting me speak.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Councillor Andy. Right, just in terms of the question about audit wells, no, it shouldn't impact. There shouldn't be anything around the decisions that would be taken around that would impact on the audit, because effectively, the only way it would impact is if we change. It would presentationally change one of the tables in the accounts to do with how we present between earmark reserves and general balances, because the disclosure requirements in the Code of Practice for local government accounting require you to, as I say, to separate out earmark reserves from general balances. So if we move money between one to the other, and if that's a material movement from when we submitted the draft accounts, we would need to do an audit adjustment to reflect that. But as I say, it doesn't impact on the actual accounts in terms of their balanced overall position. It would merely be a disclosure change to reflect that we'd classified them differently in the decisions that members took. So that would be the only impact there. In terms then of the actual 12 million. Yeah, so actually the 1.365 Homes for Ukraine, just to explain what that one is. So you'll be aware that I can't quite remember the exact figures now, but basically for every the scheme that UK and Welsh governments put in place was that for every Ukrainian person that came into the county, and this applies for every county across Wales, the local authority would get an amount of money to support the costs of supporting and helping those war-torn sort of refugees, as it were, to settle. So I think my memory serves me right, and I might be wrong, but I think it was something like £11,500 per person, and they also then gave a separate amount of money for children, and obviously that was passed on to schools, etc. So over time, we have received a significant amount of money, and that has been being used to support two things. It's supported a specific team who've been doing re-enablement. So Sue Forbes and her team, who are supporting that community, and it has also been used to give direct support to provide things for the people to settle, to perhaps pay rent for them in the very early stages, or to buy furniture, or all sorts of things that were legitimate within the scheme. But effectively there is then money which we haven't allocated. Now what I would observe with that is that I think across the authority, we have probably been supporting people through social care and through other teams, as well as purely through the housing team. But we've only really been directing the money explicitly internally directly to the housing team for Sue's team, etc., and also to the actual external costs we've incurred supporting that community. So at the minute we have this 1.3 million still in reserves. Now I am absolutely confident as an authority we have used all the funds that we received to support for the purposes it was given. But what we haven't done is necessarily allocate that out. Now, we do have a forward commitment still in relation to some of that that staffing and that team, and I've been discussing with Katie about that, and how do we sort of mainstream the elements of that we need to mainstream, as compared to continue to support it through that budget, but or that reserve. But at some point in time, I think we can take a view that actually we can now reallocate that earmark reserve, because we've exhausted it and we've used it in the context of supporting people, but we've still got it sat there as a reserve, and therefore we can take that back into our general balance position. And I think that's a piece of work that we still need to do. And as I say, I've started that conversation with Katie around what further do we need to use from that money going forward, and what therefore can we potentially come back and release back to the centre. And yeah, we'll provide an update through the reporting on that, so that you're au fait and know what we're doing with that. So that's what that one is. In terms of the others, yeah, as I say, I think some of the others ultimately there are legitimate reasons for them to sit there. So if I just give you a small one as an example, there is £16,000 on the bottom of page 119, which has been set aside for procurement training. Now, the reason that's been set aside is because we are absolutely aware that procurement is an area of concern for us in the authority. There is new legislation that we need to bring everybody up to speed on. We are introducing a contracts register that everyone needs to be brought up to speed on. So I, Sianed, absolutely see a very definite need to spend on procurement training. However, you could decide as members that actually that isn't a priority for us, and that you would rather see that money used for another purpose. And so that's why I'm saying that I think it's for consideration. As officers, for each of those that are in that column, we believe that there's a very good, legitimate reason why we.
Okay.
The chair cut me off. You cut me off in my flow as well. I'm not sure where it cut off, but what I was saying was that, whilst they've been set aside for very legitimate reasons, the heads of service believe they're needed for those very specific purposes, you could nonetheless take a decision that actually you don't believe that's a priority, and it can be reallocated to support our resilience or for another purpose. So that's all I'm meaning in the context of why I've said they're for consideration. I believe them to be legitimate, and each of the heads of service are strongly of the view that they need those for those purposes. But as I say, that's for you to endorse or disagree with.
Thank you, Amanda, and the power I wield with my pen up here. It's great fun. Councillor Andrew, are you content with that?
No, I'm content with that. Thank you for the Ukrainian explanation. I wasn't picking on that particular thing. It was just a large ticket item, which is, obviously wasn't, 200,000, 220,000 been spent and left 1.35 million. So I wanted to know why it was under consideration one. There's another one there, but we won't go into it. There's another one which I think is just a normal reserve, and it is to mitigate specific risks in dilapidations buildings, presumably £1 million there for consideration, which should be really, to my mind, a part of resilience reserves. But the total at the bottom is 12,800,000. Whereabouts is that shown in the table? Because the actual table above it in the report doesn't seem to have it all. It's obviously amalgamated into something. But if Amanda can just tell me where it is, and what figure it is, because the total reserves and balances is 12,843,000. So where are those shown in the table 3, please?
Just bear with me while I just zip up to table 3. Yeah, so at the minute, those reserves are within the mixture of service reserves and corporate reserves at the top and the general balances. So it yeah, I can assure you it's within the total. It's just a subset of a breakdown, effectively, of those figures. So you can see in that table on page 114. So effectively just moving across. So effectively column 3 is the opening balance. So that's less important. So column 4 is the closing balance. And if you go to the bottom of the table in column 4, then that equals the 57 million pounds, which is shown 57.738 million pounds, which is shown in our financial statements. Then effectively in column 5, you can see that column comes to nil. So effectively all I'm doing there is saying take it from one reserve and put it into another reserve. And just reallocate it. And then in terms of that, then leaves the balances that are in column 6, and then for the top half of the table, so for the service reserves and for the corporate reserves, they're then split into the 2 columns to categorize them as either being earmarked or for consideration. So effectively, I've the 15 and the 12 equal. So on page 123, you can see you can see that the line total earmarked reserves is, so actually in the accounts as they currently stand, the total earmarked reserves is 29.808 million. So that's earmarked revenue reserves. I've suggested then moving 1.516 million into general fund, which equals 28.291, and then the 15 and the 12 is just the 28 split into 2 columns. So I can assure you again, it's all there. It's just a breakdown of a splitting out of certain numbers into different categories.
You happy, Councillor Andrew? Oh, you're on mute. Ooh.
Let's try again. Just thank you very much. So we've got 12,800 quid worth of reserves. Just when you, I think that's increased by about 10,000 over the last couple of years. Is that correct?
Well, as I say, the reserves overall have increased by about 8 million. I haven't got the equivalent of that 12 million from the previous year, so I don't know, without going through and adding them all up, I don't know to what extent they've moved from the previous year. But in global terms overall, our reserves, as I say, have gone up by about 8 million pounds.
Okay, and you intend to cap it at 5% then, Dean?
Yeah, so when I'm talking about the 5%, so I'm only talking then about the revenue reserves, because obviously capital reserves can't, generally speaking, can only be used for capital. You can't use capital monies for revenue. So when I've talked about the 5%, I'm suggesting that we hold 5% of our gross budget as earmarked revenue reserves. So that would be the total earmarked reserves for revenue, but also the general fund balance, which you can obviously use for either capital or revenue. So as it stands at the moment, after the decisions that I'm proposing in the report, I think we would now be holding well, 12.841 million against our gross budget, which equates to 4.35%. As I say, I haven't counted the capital reserves because you're not allowed to use capital for revenue.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Amanda. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Andrew. Just making it clear, Amanda, the piece of work on the Ukrainian funding, will that come back to this committee when you've done a report on it?
Yeah, I'll update I'll update it through one of my monitoring reports.
That's great, thank you. Just checking with Dawn and Jane that you've been able to capture the extra question, you know, that have arisen, because obviously lots of heads of service aren't here. So thank you for that. Councillor Gareth next, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for all the detail and all the work on that, Amanda. And I also think, you know, it's a really, considering where we were to where we ended up, it's been some really, obviously really hard work and lots of, you know, difficult decisions being made in various departments, and overall, you know, the end result hasn't been too bad, even though we have actually made a shortfall and we can't actually get away from that. I think you and Gareth have made the right decision to actually confront the days shortfall which have built up over the last 11 years. So I just assume that means that both of you are staying for the next few years, because you haven't actually kicked it down the road to let somebody else sort it out. I think one of the learnings, you know, we can't get away from the fact that school balances have dropped by 30%, and that school redundancy costs were £883,000, which is a considerable amount. What I would have liked to have seen, and you know, it's great that we've been able to absorb them and we've managed them within the budget, but I would have liked to have actually looked at these wider consequences when we were actually making the decision, setting the budgets, so that we were actually doing this in an informed way, that we got a budget for the redundancies and that we understood that there would be costs to pay into the pension fund and things. We've coped with it, but it would have been good to have this sort of information up front, and it's possibly something we need to look at going forward whenever we look at changing budgets and altering things. Got a few questions on the reserves, Amanda. On page 121, the insurance reserve is 2.6 million. So just, you know, just want an understanding, you know, are we self-insuring some projects in some areas, or are there claims out there that we know we're going to have to pay out on? Because it just looks like a fairly large amount. On page 122, we've got digital transformation, and it's great to see that we've actually put more money into that. That's gone up to just over 1.1 million, or we're looking to put it up to 1.1 million, because obviously any transformation and change is actually going to cost money. My main concern with that is that have we actually addressed the Audit Wales criticisms, where they said that we got no short-term, medium-term or long-term milestones, and that we hadn't actually identified the resources needed to actually deliver our digital strategy? They said that we hadn't got any arrangements to identify and evaluate value for money of our strategic approach to digitisation, and we hadn't actually identified any savings. So it's great that we've got the money, we've done the preparation, but stating the obvious, we can only spend it once. So we've got to get those issues sorted and fixed before we actually move on to spend it, and we need to do it sooner rather than later, I think. And then on page 126, there's the TACP, which is a big number. We've had some really, really good results coming through, or good reports coming through on what's happening on housing. So I just wanted, again, the reassurance that, you know, those delays that cost us 550,000 pounds last year, that we're now on top of them and that we're now up to speed on that side of things. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I just going back to your point about the redundancies. Yeah, I absolutely. I think I think, you know, and I think as times get harder, the potential for that grows, I guess, and we need to, as you say, be be more on the front foot in terms of planning the potential costs that might arise. I mean, obviously, it's difficult to predict any specific costs because it depends who individually may come and what their personal circumstances are. But clearly, as you say, we need to be setting aside money in advance. So that's something we'll take on board for the future. In terms of insurance, yeah, I think we do self-insure in some areas. We also obviously have set up where we have to pay the first 50k or the first 10k or whatever of any particular claim, subject to the nature of it, and that reserve is there to help effectively fund the ongoing arrangement with reserves. So in terms of how it works, each year we effectively recover through internal from each service budget effectively a contribution to reserves, to the insurance, and then we pay out the premiums, and the balance is in the reserve. I think actually, although it does look like a big sum of money, I think if you were to speak to insurance advisors, they probably would say we should have a much higher level of reserve than we actually do. So I'd be reluctant to bring it down. But yeah, it's something we need to monitor and keep on board. And obviously at the point claims actually crystallise to be legitimate claims, then actually it's an accounting provision rather than reserve that's needed. So that's something, we've got a dedicated insurance officer who obviously monitors and keeps on top of that. In terms of digital transformation, yeah. Obviously, from my point of view, in terms of putting the money in there, it's in recognition of the fact that we're continually talking, aren't we, about the need to create capacity to allow us to invest in transformation, be it digital or other transformation. About the specific point about the recommendations or learning from what it was, I think that's absolutely valid, and I think something again that I'm very aware of the need that I think there's been a range of digital transformation that's happened in the past, maybe, or developments we do where people are I guess keen to identify the projects, but less keen to identify the savings that it comes from. But joking aside, we're very keen to ensure that in making digital transformation, and we're certainly at the moment doing work with a company called Triple Value Impact who have introduced a whole range of digital solutions to us, and I know Gareth in particular, for instance, is pursuing a couple of them quite keenly. We're absolutely sure that we need to make sure that we are actually yielding and achieving the savings that we're expecting to, and driving those through, but also obviously achieving the wider benefits that the transformation brings. So that's something we're very acutely aware of. But I take your general point in the context of that. We perhaps need to give some more explicit thought to that from a strategy point of view. And then TACP. So you're referencing now the budget reductions that were in last year, and so so obviously we weren't able to achieve the savings that we'd hoped at the start of the year, that we'd built in as a result of the TACP, and I think, if my memory serves me right, I think when we built those in the 23-24 programme, I think Welsh Government were sort of on the cusp of announcing TACP, and then in the end it got delayed a little bit further. Obviously, we did in the end take advantage, not so much directly ourselves, but more through our RSL partners, and so certainly we should be seeing some of that coming through in as we progress further forward, along with other work I'm sure that Katie's doing. Katie, I don't know if you want to say anything about that specifically.
So obviously you'll be familiar, the TACP grant is that opportunity for us to bring on that supply at a faster rate than through social housing grants. So we really maximised it last year, but the actual, like anything with supply, there are sometimes delays and it hasn't all been delivered through the council. So we are still waiting. I've just checked earlier on and we've had about a handful of those properties through out of the 60. So that will start to come. It's a bit slower than what we'd expected in terms of those being handed over into our management. I guess, and you'll know from the service performance review, as well as the supply. We're working on a lot of other areas to try and find those reductions in other ways through the prevention and looking at alternatives around the temporary accommodation. So the TACP is quicker than social housing grant, but still comes with the same challenges that you have from buying properties, refurbishing properties, and all that work.
Yeah, obviously, as I said, you know, it takes time to actually build up the momentum. I just wanted the reassurance that we're starting to see that momentum coming through now. And you say from the service reviews, there seems to be some really good news coming through on it.
Yeah, we've just been working now on our next round, and the capacity, and it's something I've been talking to Emily and Ryan and everything, the capacity for us to be able to deliver that at pace is something that's been really key, and we've been looking at as part of making sure across the board that these efficiencies can be delivered, whether that's the supply and the alternative use, that we have that capacity, which we will build in, and we have tight timescales this year, and again, another ambitious round of TACP for next year.
Yes, certainly.
Gareth, you mentioned the digital strategy, the Audit Wales. So just so you're aware, the action plan will be coming to this committee at the end of October. So you'll have a chance to review the action plan for that.
Excellent. Yeah, you know, I suppose my point was I just wanted to make sure that the steps were in place before we actually spend the money, because it's really good news that we've actually allocated the money. We just need to make sure we make the most of it now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Charlie.
Yeah, just very briefly, Gareth, and obviously you know this, but if anybody's listening, you talked about having all the information, as much information we can, we're making decisions around redundancies, but obviously each individual school sets their own budget, and the timing in a single year settlement is really difficult. We get told just before Christmas what we're getting, then we get a final settlement end of February, and the financial years don't overlap. So having that multi-year view where you could take a more holistic approach would be much better off for everybody. But clearly, yeah, you know, we're not there yet, and it is quite difficult when we're having to make decisions, guessing what next year's situation is going to be. It is a difficult process all over, you know, all over. But I just thought I'd point that out, that that's one of the anomalies, that we don't set school budgets.
Thank you, Councillor Charlie, for that. And you were very hopeful, thinking someone was watching out there, weren't you? Councillor Anne online.
Thanks, Chair. Amanda, I'm looking at page 105 and table 2 specifically. I think I'm right in saying that our schools are one service out of a total of 13 within the council. In your table 2, you're talking about schools redundancy costs, and obviously the report talks about how a third of schools approximately have had to make redundancies, and the cost of that has just been under 900 grand. So does this report actually say that there were no redundancies elsewhere in the other 12 services to be able to have the council achieve a balanced budget?
I'm not explicitly saying that, in the sense of I'm merely reflecting in that table the changes between the third and the fourth quarter in terms of what were some of the substantial differences in numbers, and obviously because of the scale of the schools redundancies, then obviously that was of a magnitude that it that it was one of the differences. I don't know whether, Fran, I'm a slight hospital pass to the back here, whether you're able to answer a wider question about redundancies. No.
Not really, sorry. No, I'd have to go back and talk to HRBP colleagues.
Okay, Councillor Anne, we will put that on the list of questions to be answered in writing from this meeting, because it seems, you say,
Thanks, Chair. And I think
people
part of the learning for me is, I mean, I think redundancy is part of a solution, isn't it, in terms of lack of funding and resourcing. So I think it's really quite important that members and the public are aware of the extent to which redundancies are being applied across all 13 services. So obviously, if you could find the answer just to the question I've asked today, but if we could actually have that in additional outturn reports in terms of for sort of further years. And then just a final question, I don't know whether you're able to answer it, Amanda, but obviously you're right, schools have used, 30% surplus of the reserves. And obviously that's a reduction that's never going to be added to or made up. And obviously the council's reserves are slightly added on to if you take them in isolation to school. So what's your view as we are now into 5 months of the current financial year of the resilience of school budget, and given that we're about to go into further?
So maybe turn your camera off, Councillor Anne, you're cutting out there. Amanda will come in and answer that.
Did she catch the question? Sorry, Chair.
Yeah, I think you were just asking me, Councillor Anne, about what my view on the resilience of schools was.
Yeah, that's right. The budgets, yeah.
Okay. Well, I think just quickly to go back on the point about redundancies, and obviously, as I say, we can furnish you with that information. But I would also observe that as part of the budget reductions, a number of services, other services, effectively gave up vacant posts. So I think it doesn't mean there haven't been staff losses or post losses just because there haven't been redundancies, and I guess ultimately it's more preferable if we can lose a vacant post than having to actually make an individual redundant. So anyway, just to make that observation. But in terms of the schools budgets this year, I'm not well cited enough to give you an informed view on that. At this point in the year, what I guess I would observe, and the next report will come onto it, won't it? Is that actually all of our budgets are clearly under significant pressure. The outlook, unfortunately, for the future doesn't look good, and I think unfortunately, Conwy, as I'm sure a number of other local authorities are starting to I guess increasingly look less and less resilient, especially if the demand and pressure for services continues apace, whilst funding doesn't. So I guess in general terms, I'd make that observation. In terms of specifically on schools, I guess all the schools have set a balanced budget for 24-25, having made spending plans around the resources it has available, and obviously that may be to further use reserves in year and or other means. So I've no reason to believe in 24-25 schools are not resilient, because they, as I say, they have set balanced budgets. I think the concern probably again is more for the future, isn't it? As the pressures on the council as a whole increase, as pupil numbers decline, and obviously that's an issue, I think, for some of our primary schools where the throughput of pupil numbers is still on the decline, although I believe on the increase then maybe for some of our secondary schools. So I think that's also an issue. So I think again, I think we need to remember that when schools have had to make difficult decisions around how they set balanced budgets, it hasn't necessarily all come as a result of the need to the cut, for want of a better phrase, that's been imposed on them in the budget. It also might be because they have been using balances for a number of years and not addressing the underlying budget position, and or declining pupil numbers, and the cumulative effect of all of those things might have then led to that sort of crunch position that meant there was the need to lose staff. So I think it's a complex position, isn't it? But unfortunately, I think going forward, it may well get more difficult again, but I think that's just the reality of and the nature of local government funding.
And if I could just come back, Chair, I completely concur, Amanda, and it's a bleak position. And I think I can't talk for all schools, but my sense is certainly that the majority of schools have to use reserves or else they just can't function, is their view. And in the light of that, in future quarterly reports, could you perhaps give a bit more detail about that in terms of the number of schools who are balanced budgets are completely dependent upon the depleted reserves that you're reporting on here today. I think it would really help us all focus our minds on the level of funding and the underlying issues within our schools. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Anne. You okay with
Yeah, I can certainly bring some information around, as you say, to the extent schools have balanced their budgets this year, to what extent reserves have been used. I can bring that. Yeah.
Thank you, Amanda. Well, I've got no more questions in the room. I've just got 3 brief questions for you, Amanda, if that's okay. The first one, page 113, Porth areas, £65,000 to mitigate potential claims. I wasn't quite sure what that was.
I'm again, Councillor Charlotte. Unfortunately, I don't have that level of detail, and I'll come back to you if I may.
It is disappointing that the heads of service aren't here.
Yeah, no, I appreciate.
Very
Yeah,
much is. So if we could add that to the list.
yeah,
of
of course.
questions, please, Dawn and Jane. The second one, home to school transport, safer routes delayed, 269,000 non-achievement. For how long? Do we know how long this delay is going to last? Do we know anything about that? Is anyone online?
I can perhaps come in a little bit on that. So yeah, so I think when this was obviously when we set the 23-24 budget, I think there were a number of potential routes that were up for review. I don't know the detail of why they were delayed, or even what was included in the initial, or whether there were specific routes included in the initial saving, as opposed to it just being a generic amount put in. But certainly, obviously, one route was implemented last year. I think there's another route that's currently being considered, and there are others potentially in the pipeline. So yeah, I don't know the detail about the delay, but that's the detail in terms of what's coming through.
Thank you, Amanda. We'll ask that question as well outside of here. And the third one will also fall into the same category. The pay and display at Porth areas, that was passed several years ago, I think under the previous administration. Just wondering why it's still not come to fruition. So we shall ask that one as well from this committee. So no one else has got any questions. We now move on to the recommendations, page 102 and 103. And as Amanda said, please consider column 8, page 121 for consideration of this, appendix 2. Is there anything that you want to make, any recommendations on that you want to make, members? And if so, could I have proposers and seconders? Councillor Hannah.
I'd like to thank Amanda for the really detailed explanation she gives and for the hard work that's obviously going behind this. I'd like to propose that we go with the recommendations as they stand. Seem eminently sensible to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hannah. And Councillor Andrew online.
I'd like to endorse what Councillor Hannah's just said. Obviously, there is a lot of work in here. But I would like to add to the proposal, which Councillor has proposed. I'd like to see the consideration for column 8, a report done on this. I know Gareth touched on it before, but my proposal would be, an update on what heads of services and street director would like, and consider column 8 before it goes through a democratic process. Was that a bit long-winded? You can rephrase that better than me.
Sorry, Councillor Andrew, can you just clarify what it is that you're asking for, please?
Right, column 8, which is for consideration. They have a list of £12 million worth of reserves in the budget, which we're not sure. Amanda indicated that it would need a democratic solution or democratic steer on those. You're looking puzzled.
Yeah, I think the reference was that it would be coming back through democracy to look at those issues.
Right, okay, maybe I might have missed that, but
I just
if
clarify
that's
that.
so, I'd be quite happy just to go with an all recommendation then.
Sorry, I think.
Okay, yeah, no, Amanda, did you?
Well, just to say, obviously, cabinet will be considering it after this report, but I would also observe anyway that in the context of our current need to contain our spend, then you know, a moratorium in terms of spending the reserves, no matter how legitimate they may be, will need to be in place. So I think that there'll be ample opportunity post cabinet's decisions to reconsider anyway.
Thank you, Amanda. Are you content with that, Councillor Andrew? Are you content to go with the?
Yeah.
the
No,
main
content.
proposals?
No, content. Yeah, that's good enough for me.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Kerry, as well. So we've had a proposal from Councillor Hannah and a second to that from Councillor Dilwyn. No, Andrew was asking the question. Councillor Dilwyn said he would second. So we have a proposer and a seconder for the recommendations on page 102 and 103. Please could members show in favour? And online, how many have we got? 1 and 5 online. Anyone against? No. Oh, there's a hand up there. Oh, I can just see fingers. No, someone pressing the button. Okay, and any abstentions? No, that's carried then. Thank you, members. We now go on to long-suffering Amanda's final report, the revenue budget 24-25, Q1 monitoring report, pages 128 to 145, and we're going the same format as before, Amanda, and then the comments from Councillor Charlie.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so this is the final report. So this is the first quarter revenue outturn reports, and actually, you know, out of all the reports, I guess this is the one that gives me the greatest concern in terms of where we are and how it potentially looks after the first quarter. So having set the budget in February, and obviously having set the budget, taking account of the pressures that we had at the time, you know, and obviously substantial funds have been added in certain areas, etc. Having done the first quarter review, services are already projecting significant service pressures, and I guess they are in three main areas, being social care, ERF, and housing. Now, in fairness to housing, just using that as an example, I think it probably is reflective of the fact that we've been ambitious in expecting the savings to do with TACP, etc., to come through quickly, and maybe as Katie explained, the timeline on that is slightly more extended, and therefore that's causing that pressure. But yeah, it nonetheless is worrying clearly that when we've already when we're only really a few months from having set that budget, that we're already still seeing significant pressure again. Having said that, what I would observe, and this is I guess a pattern that we've seen before, that obviously we are forecasting a substantial outturn in Q1, and actually by the end we get it in hand, and I guess there's two things there. You know, it could be in a way that the early forecasting, and I guess it's fair to say that, isn't it? Because clearly the earlier you're trying to predict to the end of the year, the less certainty you've got in terms of the actual, and the more element of the prediction is something that hasn't yet happened, and therefore forecasting based on the current information, for instance the current level of children looked after, etc., might be forecasting a position that in the end might not be quite as bad, and it's getting that balance between being realistic in a forecast but also not I'd rather in one way have bias towards the worst position than have bias towards an optimistic position that then proves more difficult to manage later on in the year. We will be and are taking action to put arrangements in place to now try and manage spend very closely. So just aside, I'll come back and touch on that afterwards, but just aside then from the service pressures, just to talk about some of those other bigger picture things that would impact on the budget. You'll be aware that when we set the budget, we forecast for pay at 5% for both teachers and also for NJC staff. The Welsh panel that recommends teachers' pay has not yet made a recommendation, but we have heard the new Chancellor of the Exchequer reference a 5.5% pay award for teachers. Now, if it were to be agreed at 5.5%, then we would be short in a full year cost at 276,000, part year cost 161,000 in the current year. We await to see what those independent panels actually recommend and whether they recommend something different for Wales than in England. I guess the hope maybe is that if it's being agreed by UK government that there might be funding and some consequential funding through for that. So time will tell in that sense. But as it stands, if it's agreed at 5.5, we'll have a shortfall in the current year of about 161 for teachers and 276 going forward with the full year effect. In terms of the pay for NJC, we allowed, you'll recall that for the last 2 years, the national employer has moved away from a percentage uplift on pay. And they've done that in the times of high inflation to ensure that actually the lower paid staff members have had a much more inflation-proofed pay award than actually those higher paid. But what they've done therefore is they've settled at a cash amount per incremental point. And for the last 2 years, they've given a cash uplift on every single point of the scale of 1,925, and that's meant for those at the low end of the scale on our GO1 posts that the pay award, I think the year before last was about 10%. Last year, I think it was about 8%. Whereas at the top end of the scale, it's actually been more along the lines of I think for last year it was 3.8% for staff on the higher grades, and as I say, about 8 or 9% for those on the lower grades. Anyway. It looks like they're going to continue, or they have continued with that method. So the offer this year is £1,290 per scale point. We've actually budgeted. I worked it out on an assumption of £1,430 per person. So actually, therefore, if the pay award gets implemented, or the pay offer gets implemented, then we will have sufficient budget for the NJC staff. Having said that, 2 unions have rejected the offer and are currently out to ballot about strike action. Unfortunately, those ballots don't close until into the autumn, I think into October, late October. So I think the likelihood of an NJC pay settlement this side of Christmas probably looks quite limited, which is unfortunate. And I guess, last year they went to strike ballot as well. It didn't succeed. They didn't get the numbers to strike. Obviously, who knows what the mood might be this year? Obviously, if NJC members are seeing more generous settlements elsewhere in the public sector, then maybe their appetite for strike might be greater. Who knows? I think, unfortunately, though, the funding envelope is from within local government funding. So I think the national employer is trying to make it clear that whatever settlement happens for a local government staff, it is affordable. And I think we're in a little bit of an unfortunate situation again as local government that there's a perception out there that all public sector workers are getting pay awards, these big pay awards, when actually that may apply to some, but not unfortunately to local government quite the same way because it's funded differently. But anyway, if we get that, if that gets through, then we will have sufficient funding in our NJC pay award, and actually it probably would cover then that underfunding that we would potentially have for teachers. So on pay, it looks like unless there is a higher offer made to NJC, it looks like we should be there or thereabouts. You will recall, however, though, that we had an uncertain situation in the budget around the teachers' pension contributions. So there was an actuarial valuation of the teachers' pension fund, which resulted in a 5% increase in the employer's contribution to teachers' pay for their pensions from 1st of April this year. That actually is going to cost us as an authority about £2.5 million. I anticipated, I was anticipating we would be short of that, and therefore I built an income stream of £2 million into the budget. So we already absorbed £500,000 into the budget as it was. Early indications now from Welsh Government is that that's going to be short again, and we potentially are only going to receive through UK to Welsh Government and Welsh Government to us maybe only about 1.8 million. So we're going to potentially again be short for teachers' pension costs, which we will incur by a couple of £100,000. So that again is another pressure. But as I say, if it works out that NJC award remains as it's offered, then in the main, I think they roughly will balance each other out. So that's positive that there isn't that further additional pressure. I would also just reference interest rates. So whilst at the minute it's looking manageable, I would just flag that there are potential risks around the pressure on interest rates, because at the point we did the forecast for the current year, obviously you'll recall that last year they were expecting, I say they, I mean economists, financial advisors, etc., were expecting that interest rates would start to come down a little bit quicker than they actually have. So we'd forecast using certain assumptions about the timing of those interest rate drops, which may not now be as quick as we'd forecast. Having said that, obviously it also then depends on the timing of our spend, and that's a bit more difficult to predict. We talked about it earlier in terms of capital spend and the timing of when that happens. So at the moment, it does look like our interest budget is there or thereabouts, but I'm just flagging that subject to the timing of our spend and subject to the timing of further interest rate decreases that may or may not happen, and the timing of when they may happen, that pressure might actually grow as the year progresses. So just to flag it as a potential risk. In terms of looking at the savings that were put forward as part of the 24-25 budget, again, you'll recall that £12 million of savings were included in the budget, and it's positive to say that at this stage in the year, services are anticipating that the vast majority of that is on target to be achieved. So that's positive. So as I've said in the report, you know, and as we've discussed already in the context of our reserve position, you know, we really cannot afford the kind of potential shortfall that's being estimated. So we absolutely have got to take corrective action. And you know, you endorsed over the last couple of years corrective action, which we took and which we put out to services through communications around slowing and pausing, deferring spend, etc. But we've done it to date in a less robust way, in the sense of we've put the instruction out, but it's been no more than a communicated instruction, and therefore it's been very much left to budget holders and heads of service to effectively make those decisions around what's priority, etc., etc. We are now looking to implement more robust spending controls, and what I mean by that is we are now making system changes. We're currently liaising with our provider of our financial ledger system to actually put steps and physical controls into the system, so that as as orders are processed, they will then be subject to review by a spending panel to provide a more rigorous approach to that, and it'll be in there's sort of a two-step thing, in the sense of we're also setting up a procurement board which will look at it at the front end of stuff. So effectively, if you need to go out to tender, we'll be taking a view about whether that's a procurement we want to happen before you start that process, because there's no point using resource to go through a tender process for it then to be given the knockback after you've put all that effort in. So we'll be doing that at the earlier stage, and then in terms of sort of stuff that doesn't have to go to a tender and we're going through a requisition process, we'll be doing it, as I say, through system controls. To allay your concerns around things around sort of slowing up essential spend and making it awkward for people, that absolutely isn't the intention. We're looking to make the process as smooth and as slick as possible. We'll also have certain types of spend that will go through automatically. So for argument's sake, payments to care homes will automatically get paid because the decision on that is back at the care plan point. So if we're happy that the decision around the care that's needed and being put in place for a person, then the payment will follow automatically. So certain things will be exempt from the process because of the nature of the spend, but other stuff will be subject to that control. And I think at the end of the day, whilst it might feel a little onerous and it might feel a little rigorous, and it might feel, and I'm sure there are some officers that might feel that we're undermining trust in them and things like that. And that absolutely is not the intention. That absolutely is not. We absolutely trust and respect the decisions that our staff are making, but we have to control our spend. And I think people, everybody needs to understand and appreciate the reason that we're implementing such rigor. It's not to be unhelpful. It's not to block things, but it is to make sure that we're being consistent in absolutely making sure that we're focusing the spending that we do on our highest priorities, and that's a must for us as an authority to survive this difficult financial situation that we're in. So that's as I say, currently being put in place. It's taken a little bit longer than we might like, purely because obviously we've got to actually put the system changes into the actual system itself, but that's being put in, as I say, to ensure that we can seek to contain our position. I've set out in the report obviously what our reserves and balances are should we overspend at the end of the year, in terms of the impact it would have on those reserves, and it would clearly obviously only serve to deplete them further and undermine our resilience. I am currently preparing the next iteration of the medium-term financial plan, which I'll be coming back in the autumn with, just in a high level terms. The position hasn't changed significantly from when I did it last time, and we're still looking for 25, 26 now, potentially at around pressures of around £20 million. So still very, very significant with potential, no real hope at the end of the tunnel in the context of additional funding from government. So hence why we have no choice but to seek to contain and minimise our excess spending over income in the current year. So as I say, unfortunately, not good reading for the first quarter, but to give you assurance that we're working collectively to put steps in place to address it. And on this occasion as well, Councillor Sherry, you'll be pleased, Kat and Steph are here if you want to ask any questions about social care. So
down, do you, ladies? Thank you very much. Oh, it's okay. Thank you very much indeed for that, Amanda. Councillor Charlie, are you going to cover?
Yeah, just very briefly, just to thank Amanda again. It would have been nice to have a bit of a break between the last year's revenue report, which was broadly positive, and then back into the morass, which is looking at this year's spend. It is incredibly challenging. And we do have to have that at the forefront of our mind all the time. I think we've long left the zone where it's doing what you want to do. It's doing what we have to do, and making some really, really difficult choices. But it is really concerning. And clearly Conway's not alone in this position. But I guess we've been here before, and we will look to work through. There's a huge amount of work going on. It puts a huge amount of pressure on Amanda and Reen, the senior officers, having to do this extra layer of check, but it is necessary. There's lots of good ideas to do. I'm often struck when you look at our capital program, the huge amount of schemes we do all throughout the county, and they all have merit, and we got some really dedicated officers, but some things have to go, or else we're not going to be able to provide the absolute essentials. So very challenging, and yeah, difficult. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Charlie. Yes, I think this next few months is going to be down to choices and priorities, isn't it? That's what is going to have to be made, some hard choices. Reen, you wanted to pop in there before we go to questions?
Yeah, very, very quickly. And I think I guess it's unfortunate, really, because the report that will be coming in September will explain the work that's gone on over the past 5-6 months. I think it's since the beginning of March, really, in trying to bring a plan together around how we address not just this year, but the years to come. I think multi-year settlements would really help us in that respect, because as both Charlie and Amanda have alluded to, it's really difficult to plan when you don't know from one year to the next what the settlement's going to be. But I think I'd just like to reiterate, there's a lot of work that's gone on in the background here to try and get these controls in place. They're very difficult. They're not comfortable in that it's not what we would want to do. We've been advised by the experts in the field on it. SIPA have helped us in order to formulate a plan which will come before you as a slight revision to the peer review report, which I hope will give you some comfort around the work that's gone on. But I think I'd be remiss of me not to thank both Amanda and Gareth for the incredible work they've done in the background. You don't see everything in this committee. There's a lot of work that goes on, but also to the dedication of our heads of service and all officers. It's been the most challenging 2 years of my career, and I'm sure all heads of service here would agree. It's been incredibly difficult. But I know that we've got dedicated staff that will do all they can to try and make it work for the residents of our county. So hopefully the report in September will give you a feel of the controls and measures and different things we're looking at to bring forward over the next 4 to 5 months, really. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Reen. Right, members' questions, and just to put you on notice, there will be a 5-minute comfort break after this report before we go. And yes, stop cheering at the back. Okay, so questions, please, members, on this report before. Councillor Gareth.
As you quite rightly say, Amanda, it's really, really concerning that we're at a £5.5 million over budget in the first quarter, especially now, inflation seems to be, by all accounts, easing off and everything else. And, I suppose the good news is that, the shortfall in the savings look at around just over 200,000. So there's been big progress actually made on the budget savings, but the rest of the budget seems to have run away with us to a certain extent. So I'm just concerned is it a case of a little bit of smoke and mirrors? What's actually the underlying driver here? And I'm going to go back to some of the Audit Wales reports where they say that there's a risk that decisions and actions taken and resources deployed are done so on inaccurate information at times, and that there's a lack of evaluation of the outcomes and activities that limits senior leaders' ability to understand the impact of some choices. So, are we actually, where we're making cost savings and we're making them for the right reasons, are those cost savings actually incurring additional costs in other areas, that law of unintended consequences at times? And do we need to do the best we can to actually look at the overall effect of the budget cuts and changes that we actually do? And you know, since I joined the council, there's always been a huge focus on quite rightly setting a balanced budget. Yet every year we seem to fail to achieve it for very valid reasons. You know, can we actually put in a position where we actually have to put in a retrospective notice that we can't balance the budget? Or is it once we've passed the budget and say it balances, you know, we deal with the consequences after, there aren't any consequences afterwards? You know, the schools seem to be delivering to budget, which is really, really good news. They're struggling on the transport, which obviously is managed by ERF. Social services, I just wondered, you know, are we able to evaluate how much of our budgetary pressures and overspends there are actually because of health board issues? That what they're doing is actually pushing through their issues are actually being pushed onto us and causing us real issues. And, you know, how much of it is also caused by the drive in the children's services to move over to not-for-profit providers. You know, are we having difficulty engaging with people, you know, companies and businesses across the border? Are there sufficient businesses or providers moving into Wales to be able to fulfill the needs for the not-for-profit requirements that we have? Because, you know, again, I'm sure that then has a knock-on effect onto budgets, and it's outside our control, but, you know, it'd be good to understand. And, you know, we look at ERF, again, areas that are well over budget, but the thing that strikes me there is how confident are we in the amounts that they're quoting you at, Amanda? Because everybody else seems to be working to the nearest pound, yet when I look at ERF's budgets, they seem to be round amounts, which then makes me wonder, are these just figures that have guesstimates that have been plucked out, or are they accurate figures? That's probably, you've heard enough from me for one day, so I'll stop at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gareth. Those are two really good questions around. I don't know if Kat or Steph wants to just quickly answer the Betsy responsibilities and financial responsibilities, and maybe Steph on the not-for-profit for children. Thank you.
I'll do the Betsy one. Yeah, it is a challenge, and this is what we've spoken to Amanda about trying to predict the amount of income that we should be getting in from BCU and being better at that. And obviously you've got a conversation as members with BCU around, you know, how we go about resolving disputes, getting agreements to funding packages when we actually commission them rather than, you know, retrospectively. So that does need improving. Yes, we do have issues that are caused by the flow in and out of hospital as well, where people are potentially medicalised and therefore they require more care when they come out. So we are talking to the health board about their approaches to risk in terms of, you know, the care that people get, and also the work that we're doing at the front door in terms of reducing the number of people that go into hospital in the first place. So yeah, so it's a whole, it's seeing ourselves as a whole system, and that will take a long time. Well, yeah, it is taking a long time to turn that around. The other thing that is happening for us in adult services is that we are having to prioritise hospital discharge because of the Welsh Government's drive for hospital discharge to improve the flow within hospitals. But that does obviously put our community services, we have to prioritise hospital discharge above community services, and that then has an added impact in terms of people needing care that then deteriorate and need more complex care when we do actually have the care available for them. So it does then become more costly than the earlier intervention that would have helped them to stay more independent and self-caring. So it's a complex picture, but yeah, we are working with the health board to kind of work through the whole system approach, and it's not, you know, focusing resources in certain areas. You need to work together on it, and the income bit is something we have looked at addressing, isn't it, Amanda, in terms of trying to predict that income in a more scientific way, I suppose, so that we can give you assurance that we're not getting to period 4 and all of a sudden finding that we've managed to resolve some disputes and some money's come back in, and then you're thinking, well, how, you know, so we're trying to work through that with the health accountants as well, and to give you more assurance.
Thank you, Kat. Yes, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I know very personally at the moment that lack of capacity within Betsy is causing patients, they're not able to treat them when they present very unwell, and it's leading to much more complications, which comes back to local authority in the end. Steph, just I know very well through my adoption work quite what the not-for-profit agenda, the strain it's putting on the children looked after service. So if you
I think the only other thing that I was going to contribute to the Betsy conversation is the length of time it takes for decisions to be made and the time of officers to complete the assessments. And then not only that, when funding is agreed, it's then regularly reviewed by health. So then they ask for further information, maybe every 2 to 3 months, which again is a real challenge for us. And with regards to the not-for-profit, I think for us, the biggest challenge is the time scale, that we hit a huge sufficiency challenge anyway in Wales for our young people to have enough placements so that they didn't go to the next tier of care. So children that should be accommodated in foster care should be accommodated in foster care, but we didn't have enough placements. So then they've gone to residential settings. Those residential children have gone to solo settings, and it's kept going. So I think that was already a real challenge for us, was the sufficiency. Adding on now the not-for-profit, where the independent agencies actually stopped recruitment drives because they didn't know what that meant for them if they wanted to continue as profit making. So we will see an impact of that, particularly around our foster placements. We have still seen some progress with internally with residential placements in Conway from the independent sector increasing. But again, that in a year's time, 2 years' time, if they keep the time frame as tight as what it is, by 2027, we can't place children without ministerial approval in those settings. That's going to put pressure. But also, along with the sufficiency, for us, it's the infrastructure. We are being asked to create a significant amount of internal resource on the same management structure as what we've had as a local authority, and people have left. So we're trying to meet this new demand and this increased pressure is really challenging. So that's having a strain, and then you spending resources looking at that, which is going to help our children and is going to help the budget in terms of cost avoidance. But we're not seeing it now because of the impact of having to do it at such a pace. So I think that's, for me, where the pressures for children's services are really standing out this year.
Thank you very much for that, Steph. Very, very worrying picture, isn't it? And we have been flagging this up with the Welsh Government for a long time. They're just not listening. Okay, Councillor Gareth, you content with? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks very much. You know, I do sympathise with the massive pressures, which to a certain extent are not of your own making and not under your control. It must be really, really frustrating. Thank you.
And I haven't got any more, no one else with their hand up for questions. Oh, Councillor Hannah.
It's just one point to clarify. Well, 2 things. One is that this 5 million that's a prediction for the 12 months. It's not, well, that wasn't quite so clear when it was discussed. So I just want that on note that it is a year. It's not been 5 million in the first quarter. Okay.
Yeah. So just to quickly clarify that, as you say, and that was my point I was making really, is that the problem in a way when you're predicting so far in advance is obviously it's harder to, you've only got a little bit of actual and a big amount of prediction, haven't you? If you know what I mean. As the year progresses, the switch changes. But yes, yeah, annual.
Yeah, it's just for people watching, just to make sure that was clear. And then my question was actually to do with the social services as well. I see there's quite a lot of areas where you have a predicted underspend. And I just want to be sure that I'm going to presume, because I know how hard you all work, that this is because you've been really effective in delegating out resources and working with people. But I do want to make sure that there aren't people missing out where we had actually allocated funds and the funds haven't been spent. Or could you explain where the underspends come from? Thank you.
If you could just just touch on that, please, Kat, on the underspends?
So if you look at the table in my pack, it's on page 134. Yeah, so our hospital social work is predicting to be overspent. Now that's partly that pressure that we've just been talking about. It's also a change in grant conditions where we have been claiming a lot of grants in, and those what eligible expenditure etc. is changing. So that's part of a mixed picture. The rest of the services for me are predicting an underspend, and that is, well, the community wellbeing services primarily grant funded anyway, but that's a reflection of the changes in the grant. And then the disability service, we're looking at that. Yeah, it's the prediction of what Amanda was saying in terms of our panel process. We're being a lot more efficient in terms of right sizing the care packages, all of that sort of thing. So that's coming through in the budget.
Thank you, Kat. I think Amanda wanted to pop in there as well. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I just wanted to also highlight that, and Kat and I have been having discussions and working on this. I think there's a little bit where over the years the spending patterns have changed, but the budgets historically have been left as they were. So I think there's a bit of work underway as well, going on to try and realign the budgets to actually reflect where the real spending is happening. So I think I guess the principal point you're wanting assurance on, Councillor Hannah, is that nobody's not being seen, and that's not the case, is it? It's probably that in reality historically those budgets have always underspent and actually funded the other stuff, and what we need to do is now put the budgets in the right place, and that work's been ongoing. Well, we've started, but it's still ongoing, because it's, as you can imagine, whilst it shows here as 10 lines, in reality you're talking about thousands of lines of budget that need to all be jigged about. So yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. That's what I was expecting to hear. I know how professionally and how well you run the service. So thank you very much.
Okay, members, if there's no more questions from that, we'll move to page 128 and 129, the recommendations. Councillor Gareth, quick.
Yeah, I was just wondering, based on what Amanda was saying, should we incorporate within the recommendations that budget holders are written to and advised that a key part of their role is to deliver to budget? I don't.
That's your proposal.
Amanda, you talked a lot around, putting the controls and things in place, and that sometimes officers thought it was being too restrictive. But we need that clear understanding that the budget holders, when they're making the decision, that is one of the key roles as well, is delivering to budget, and whether that would help.
So you're making that proposal.
I'd make that proposal
along with the recommendations. Is anyone happy to second that? Councillor Nia? Deal? Okay, members, we've had a proposal to add to these recommendations on page 128 and 129. If you could all show, please, in favour. And how many online? 4 online. Okay, thank you. And anyone against? Any abstentions? No. Okay, that is carried. Thank you very much, members. We're now going to have a long overdue comfort break for 5 minutes. For those watching, we will resume in 5 minutes. Thank you. Please. We restart the recording. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for that. And everyone's returned after the break. We now move on to item 8A, the managed service provision for agency and temporary workers, page 146 to 157. This was asked for quite a while ago, and I think Councillor Charlie's standing in for Councillor Chris Cater, who's on holiday, and I think it's Fran Lewis, Head of People and Performance, presenting the report.
It's Donna who's going to present the report, Chair. Yeah, Chris is away on holiday. I charge double time after 1 p.m, so I'm going to keep it nice and short, and I'll just hand over to Donna to go through the report.
Already. Oh. So, if you'd like to present. Thank you very much.
Landa, good afternoon. Thank you for the invite today. So basically I'm here just to share an update on the progress since we launched the managed service provision for all corporate sourcing of temporary and agency workers. So one of the main drivers for the new managed service provision was to establish value for money on this area of spend, increase governance, ensure compliance with legislation, which I believe we are achieving. Conway will likely always have a need for this type of staffing resource to help when we have peaks in demand, absences, or going through recruitment processes. So it was important to provide a way of doing this as cost effectively and as quickly as possible to ensure service delivery for all of our managers. Some of the reasons services are currently using the framework are set out in section 3.3, section 3.5.3.7. Well, as you know, the agreement was to award the contract to a managed service provider. This was Matrix, who was successful. And this is following them being awarded the Welsh Government being awarded the Welsh Government procurement tender process, which was obviously very thorough, and we'd looked through that beforehand. So Cabinet supported the decision for Conway to award to Matrix on the 11th of April last year, and that was on the basis for 3 years plus an option to extend for a further 1 year. This then triggered a period of contract negotiations, and a lot of time went into the pre-implementation. What we have now is an online portal tailored to the needs and requirements of Conway, and it also reflects our internal approval processes that we have built in. We've built in a system where there's auto approval going to our heads of services and also our vacancy control group, which reflects, mirrors really what we do in terms of recruitment. And again, that gives us that oversight and governance. It ensures IR35 compliance, which was a huge risk to Conway previously. And we can view and report on data in real time, which is something we've never been able to do before. There are some more examples around the compliance in your report, which is in section 3.5.2. Get it right? So we also, during that process, compiled data on existing placements at the time, and Matrix liaised with all the agencies that we were previously using, as well as those that were on their lists anyway, and they obtained data and loaded this onto the system. They negotiated the onboarding of suppliers, which included local ones, which we'd worked with for many years, and new ones, which we're also really delighted about. From our side, we provided data on things like our pay structures, any enhancements, our actual service structures, the details of our managers and their emails, our budget codes and job roles, linking in with the grades through our job evaluation process. So that was a huge amount of data to pull together and then have that inside that system, which helps kind of make the whole process hopefully more straightforward for managers. So as you'll appreciate, this was a significant piece of work, but with the overall aim to ensure that the process ran smoother once it was launched for all of those involved. I think it's also worth noting that that any of these built-in automated processes that we've tried to accommodate previously were manual or paper-based, so taking valuable time of our managers, link officers, HR or finance. So the managed service provider, which again is Matrix, they provide a system for our hiring managers. So currently we have 245 managers registered and 113 who are actively using it. And this allows them to set out their needs as they would in a recruitment process. They can upload their job description, the requirements, the skills they need, the Welsh language preferences, everything they need in terms of an ideal candidate. And they would then allow the system would go out and access the providers that we have on the service provision, which is currently about 176 different suppliers, and looking at how they can match our needs. I have had some really positive feedback from managers during this process about the ability to reach more suppliers, and that's really key, especially where we've got some quite specialist roles. So we went live on the 1st of December, and there continued to be an implementation and transfer of existing placements onto the new system, and this kind of really took place between December and March then as well, because there was quite a few pre-existing placements which maybe we weren't aware of that we then transitioned over and worked through. It also allowed us to avoid some of the transfer fees, which, as we've alluded to into the report, by staggering the transfer. So basically, if some agencies, if people had been with us for less than 26 weeks, they would have charged us. So we kind of did it at a timely point so that it didn't attract any costs. So what I can't do is sit here and present a figure on how much overall we have or will continue to save by comparing a bottom line figure. As this isn't a comparative way of us being able to monitor the activity, usage of agency workers will always fluctuate. What we try to do is look at the hourly rates. So that's obviously the worker themselves will get a rate which is equivalent to our job evaluated rate in the majority of instances, and then there would be a fee for the agency and a managed service provision fee, which is the MSP fee in Appendix 1, which is for the actual service provider who I've alluded to as being Matrix. So that's to really reflect the work, the effort, the sourcing, the negotiation that goes on, that's kind of hoping to save some of our managers some time that maybe they would have had to spend doing that in the past. The new system and data reporting is still relatively new, and whilst we have an estimated idea of historical overall annual spend, we don't have the detail on what that means in terms of numbers, hours and rates per placement for comparison. If our needs increase, spend may increase. However, what is important for me anyway is to ensure that I provide Conway with a framework which I know will provide a cost-effective rate per hour for those workers that we source. And so the breakdown, as I mentioned, is in Appendix 1 in terms of the fees for those agencies. And it will vary slightly in terms of the agency fee, depending on what kind of role it is, because some of them, as you'll appreciate, are maybe harder to source and therefore require a lot more negotiation or kind of recruitment on their part. Therefore, what we have endeavoured to do is give some reassurance that Matrix is, by using them, it is negotiating better agency fees for any placement that we have in the future. And before we moved over, there were a number of placements who maybe weren't on our previous framework, and there was no central negotiation point, and each hiring manager who would have a number of other things to do would be either agreeing the rates, or obviously an agency is going to look for the best rate they can get, so they would present that to them. So for new placements, I believe that the overall agency and management service fee combined would be at worst equal, but in most cases cheaper to the previous costs. What we also found going through the pre-implementation process and data gathering was that the temporary to permanent fees, which were built into contracts, were also quite significant in some cases, and they often went under the radar until a point where we were successful in recruiting to one of our positions, somebody who'd been with us through agency, which is always good, I think. And then we find that potentially there's going to be a cost attached to that. Some of these were in thousands. One that I can recall is in circa 10,000 if it would have taken place. So what I can assure Conway is that there is no charge whatsoever through any new placements that come through via the Matrix system. So after the 12-week point, there would be no cost. So if somebody had been with us for 12 weeks or less, really, by the time we recruit, everyone knows how quick it is to recruit, then people would join us and there would be no fee. So that is a significant saving in my view. And in fairness, they have worked with us. We've had some real good successes recently. So we've had some in open spaces in the RF, refuse and recycling. We quite often do that. And I know within social care. So even though we might know at week 4 or 5 that we're going to recruit them, they have no issues with us waiting to start them until week 12, so that we're not having to be charged anything. So they're not looking for fees really from us. So I'm really happy about that. One of the other reasons it'd be hard to provide a figure on the overall saving or efficiencies would be a large benefit would be about people, resource and time. So one example would be that each placement historically would have you'd have received an invoice and processed that invoice. So you know, each one of those, I think what we've got at the moment, I think it's 178 placements. I think we talked about. Each one of those would have attracted an invoice and a process and a check-in on the IR35 regulations and a number of other little checks that are along the way. But what we do have now is all of that compliance built in and one invoice for all placements. Overall, if I'm honest, I think it has gone better than I'd hoped. You always expect something to go wrong, but services have worked really well with me on the implementation. You know, there's always teething issues, but these were minor. It's usually around data, a process, a system, some information that we hadn't data loaded, or sometimes it's just sitting down and having a chat and explaining how the process works and getting around the, you know, getting your head around the change really. We've been able to work with services where we've got some specialist and hard to fill roles, for example, and where we're competing with other authorities for a pool of talent, which is pretty small. So we've held supplier forums, been able to use Matrix's knowledge and expertise to obtain national data and rates for us to understand whether there is negotiation around a market rate, and you know, or in trying to how we can showcase ourselves as the better option for a worker coming to join us. So again, I've had some really good feedback, and these would have been negotiations where managers have had to do that themselves. So we've been able to facilitate that with them, and you know, I'm thankful for that. So wins and benefits are in the value for money, the time efficiency, and increased compliance and governance. No solution is perfect, but I'm delighted by how this has gone, and will continue to hone in and make sure it works at its best for Conway. So the next steps will be to continue on with this work with services, using the data that we now have access to understand a little bit more about why we're using agency or temporary workers, and scrutinise that detail, and then continue to ensure those placements are value for money, or support managers certainly where they are needing some temporary resource. Including this would be where placements that were maybe negotiated the pre-framework, and making sure that they are cost effective, because obviously some of those, they attracted the rates that were there before. So I think that's where I'd like to see some more personal analysis and looking in those areas. But obviously I know you've had the report, and I thank you for your time. I know your time is short today, but has anyone got any questions?
Thank you very much indeed for that report and for the comprehensive run through that you've just given us now. Have we got Councillor Gareth first?
Thanks, and thanks for the clear understanding as to why you brought it in and the benefits and everything else, which, you know, got absolutely no problems, and it makes absolute sense that, you know, everything you said. So I'm just looking at the outcomes now, and whilst we can't put a financial outcome on it, and again, I can understand why, you know, what are the outcomes as far as the placements? Because I see, you know, you've got 114 at ERF, 18 in social care, and 5 in housing, 7 in education and things. You know, how many, you know, is everybody using the system, and is the system delivering for everybody? Because you said, you know, there's 245 managers who could be using it, 113 have actually used it. Are the ones who haven't used it, is it because they've had no need to use it, or how, you know, or the old source is still actually being used? And, you know, that's the outcome I'm interested in, is, you know, is it delivering for all the departments? And if it's not delivering, why isn't it delivering?
Yeah, of course. So in terms of the 245 managers, they were managers that I had access to on our system. So I knew they would be responsible for staff. So we made sure that they were set up and registered with their email. So if they ever needed to, they've got the access there, and it doesn't you know, there's no delays for them. So it wasn't that there's an expectation that they would all need it at any one time. It was just really future-proofing it. Obviously, yes, some of the areas you talked about there, certainly in ERF, housing, we have got the level of detail, and that's where the ones that were pre-matrix, as I tend to say it, is then understanding, because a lot of those will be showing up as, oh, these are pre-December. So we will start looking into actually, okay, so why do we need those? Is it still fit for purpose for them? You know, what are the plans? So we know there'll be things like seasonal demands, certainly with ERF, because we use them within our harbours, within our tramways. So all of those areas that you can look at it and think, well, yes, I can understand why we use them there. There's also restructures going on in different places. So again, it's to kind of to reduce risk, I guess, is the best way I tend to look at these things. So that would be the next thing in terms of the outcomes, is making sure we're using it for the right reasons and it is working for services. I can't sit here and say, yeah, everybody loves it and everyone's really happy with it, because I don't know. I haven't asked every single person. But where there's been challenges, we've sat down, looked at them. You know, so a recent one where we've had hard to fill posts, usually because the market rate are significantly higher. We've worked with them, we've got national data, and I've had you know, an email off the manager saying how grateful they were, and this is, you know, they were really happy. So based on that, then yes, I think we're doing the right thing, and people are not happy. They usually tell me if they're not happy. that's my sense check. In terms of if everyone's using it, so obviously in terms of the corporate services, I would say 90%, if not more, are using it. Any areas we know, I think I've alluded to in the report, we are looking at where there may be more niche needs, just so that we've now got the time to sit and understand with managers and services, okay, how do you use and what do you need, to make sure that we can then tailor it. Because whilst we've done I say one size fits all, I work with refuse and recycling, for example, because they have staff that need to be there on that morning. They need to have gone through an induction. So it's slightly different to what, you know, your blanket service would be, and that's exactly how we will apply it in maybe those areas. I think domiciliary care, for example, we're working with Mark over there in terms of looking at their needs now as well. So did that? Yes. So any areas where we found it really difficult, I think there's only possibly one area that I'm aware of. We would look at having an exemption. So a manager or head of service really would put in an exemption report, and we do have a small number of exemptions all within children's social work, just because of the significant challenges we found there, both in recruitment and agency. It is that kind of you know, difficult need, which I know Steph will know 100% more than I will. But again, we'll continue to work and make sure it's on board with that and understand that. One of our account managers has got who is from within Wales and work within social care. So that's something, you know, they're looking at it across Wales. It isn't just an issue we find, in fairness. So
thanks. Yeah, as I said, you know, the key thing is that we know what outcomes we want. Yes. And we're able to measure against it to make sure it's delivering for all the departments. Yes. And once we build that database of information, as you say, we can really start to use that then. 100%. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. We seem to have a considerable fall off of members online. We've got Councillor Hannah in the room and Councillor Anne online.
Okay, thank you. Two comments really. I'm really pleased that when people come in and do temporary work for us, that they then end up being recruited, and that shows that there's something really positive going on with the system, but also with our work environment, that people come and work for us and try it out and find out that it's a really positive experience. So that's fantastic to hear. I'm also pleased that you aim to keep the rate of pay as similar as possible. I think that's quite significant as well for morale and our staff feeling valued. I'm really pleased with that. So I just wanted to raise those 2 points. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Hannah. Councillor Anne online.
Yeah, hi Donna. Just a quick question about your comments on page 149, and it relates to schools. I mean, I do understand that there's a Welsh Government framework for supply teachers, but I don't think that extends, as I understand it, to teaching assistants. And I know in the past, you know, I've had conversations with Lowry and others about us ensuring that we've got the right caliber or experience that were required, and that appears to be one of the issues that I think is outstanding. So I wonder if your system could be adapted to include teaching assistants.
Thanks, Councillor Anne. In terms of the system, 100%, it can accommodate any types of roles. I think when you look at the fees, you know, whilst I don't think I necessarily put it in the report, it covers areas around, you know, blue light emergency kind of services as well. So whilst we haven't tapped into it all, it is definitely something that has got the scope there. Yes, there is a Welsh Government framework already for that schools can access, and I think it's recommended that they do access it around teaching assistants or temporary teaching staff, but obviously I haven't yet got into the schools. That would possibly be the next challenge, is obviously working with them, because I know how they are managed and governed are slightly different. So you know, again, with some of our policies, we can advise, but we don't necessarily. I've always struggled to say, right, this is what you've got to do, whereas a little bit easier with a corporate perspective. But obviously any kind of schools would be welcome. I think I've set the system up so that all the school locations are in there, and obviously we can set people like head teachers or the hiring head teachers with that option. So there is scope for that. It is obviously just that whether the appetite is there as well, potentially.
Okay, I think the appetite is there from the sort of feedback I've had, but I'd welcome you, perhaps, you know, you inquiring as well, Donna. That would be really useful on behalf of schools. Thanks.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Anne. I've got a couple of quick questions, if that's okay, because I can't see anyone else online. I asked for this report, didn't I? Because I was concerned about the use of local workforce. Domiciliary care, how are we going with that? Is that positive? Because I see, obviously, and you touched on it, that wasn't part of.
Yeah, I think from day one, my hope would be that domiciliary care would obviously be part of this. I think initially, I didn't have the awareness of how many workers there were in those areas, just because obviously the kind of data that we had before and where it was recorded, it wasn't there. So that was you know, I came late to the party in terms of working with Mark and colleagues within social care, but I know it's something he is looking at. He's speaking with those services and specific places, you know, for example, Sicilian. He knows it best, and he is having that discussion, and then he's touching base with myself, and we'll look at, you know, what their needs are, and then sort of take that next step, really. So yeah, it's I think initially we thought it might fall outside it, but I think from the current feedback I've got is we want to work with us on doing it. So yeah,
that's
work
great.
in progress.
Thank you. And my next one, are the unions happy about this?
To be fair, they've yeah, because I'll be honest with a couple of our hiring managers are also union reps, and I've sat with them and done demos. They were happy, and it saves them quite a bit of time, certainly within some of the roles they're doing. So yeah, I've not had any challenge. I think the only challenge I had in one union meeting, and it was actually about how to use something very technical.
I was there at that.
Yeah, I was going to say
that's why.
So yeah, no, we've sat down and gone through it, and it's yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah. Otherwise,
The next one was just a thank you for including 7.1, which I asked for regarding the use of the Welsh language.
Yes,
thank you for including that. That's really important for all concerned. And my last one, I think, is a bit of a question to Charlie. The cabinet, the previous framework had expired in the March. It had already expired by the time you brought the report, I think April the 11th, didn't you, in 2023? But it wasn't implemented until December 2023. So I think we lost quite a bit of savings there, didn't we, with the very long run into the implementation. And it's why it wasn't picked up, that it was coming to an end in the March 23. It's just a quick.
I'd have to get back to you on that one, Cheryl. I don't have the details, sorry.
Add that to your massive list, Dawn. Coming back to us. Okay, well, Diolch, that's all the questions. I'd just like to thank you for the report and all the work that's gone on. Massive piece of work, so thank you very much. We have the recommendations 2.1 on page 147. Could I have a proposer and seconder, please? Councillor Garris proposed, or Don't all rush at once. Marvellous, Near. I think you're there fractionally like the Olympic flag. You were there. Yes, could we all show, please? 5 in the room and 3 online. Anyone against? No, no, and no abstentions. Oh, 4 online. Okay, 4 online. See, can't even count now. Okay, that's passed. Thank you very much indeed. And we now move item 9, exempt items. Could I have a proposer and a seconder to go into private session? Councillor Dillwyn's proposed, Councillor Hannah's second. We just wait for everything to be turned off. Thank you, Steph.